Brienne of Tarth stood at the threshold of Winterfell's ancient gates, the bitter northern wind tugging at her thick cloak. Her breath plumed in the frigid air, and she paused for a moment to take in the sight of the vast courtyard she was stepping into once more. The stone walls of the fortress loomed tall and unyielding, adorned with wind-blown banners displaying the direwolf sigil of House Stark. Even from outside, she could sense the heart of the place, the faint warmth seeping up through the old passages, the lingering hum of centuries of history. It had not changed so much since the last time she was here, though Brienne was certain her own life had. She came as both protector and, though it still caused her a pang of disbelief, lady. There had been whispers in the Seven Kingdoms ever since the war ended, rumors that the North needed a strong guardian, someone unafraid of winter's chill and the threats that still stalked the land. Many believed Sansa Stark would return, but she had chosen a different path in the aftermath of war, forging alliances to further ensure the realm's safety, serving its people in a way that demanded she remain frequently in King's Landing or traveling across the continent. Arya Stark was a wandering soul, unlikely to ever plant her feet in any one place for too long. And so, unexpectedly, the key to Winterfell had found its way into the hands of the most loyal knight any could name, Brienne of Tarth. The proposal had come in a swirl of confusion, negotiations carried out in hushed corners while the lords of the North debated who would properly rule in the Stark name until one of the trueborn daughters returned. Brienne resisted at first, of course. She had never dreamed she was meant to lead. Her life had been devoted to service and honor, not power. And yet the logic was undeniable. To maintain the Stark legacy, Sansa needed a regent at Winterfell, someone who would nurture the land and people as fiercely as a mother bear tends her cubs. There was no one she trusted more than Brienne of Tarth. In time, Sansa's persuasion and the entreaties of the Northern Lords wore down Brienne's protests. She had thought, in her uncertain nights, that she might fail them. But the sense of duty that burned within her heart eventually cast out her doubts, and she swore a vow to hold Winterfell in trust, to watch over its people as she had sworn to watch over the Stark girls. Now she was home. Never in her most fanciful moments had she thought of anywhere but Tarth as home. Yet something about Winterfell had latched itself to her soul from the moment she first walked these grounds. Maybe it was the direwolf identity that marched in perfect step with her unwavering loyalty, or perhaps it was that she had found her greatest purpose while protecting the Stark daughters. Whatever it was, she felt in her bones that she belonged. Brienne stepped forward, the great gate closing behind her with a groan of timber and iron. A handful of Winterfell's guards bowed to her in deference, though it was a gesture that still made her uneasy for all the confidence she had gained. She had been knighted in the south, but her new station went beyond knighthood. It carried the weight of an entire region's trust. Each respectful bow, each murmured, "My lady," planted a seed of unfamiliar pride inside her, a pride laced with a sense of duty so profound that it kept her shoulders squared. She was no longer just a knight pledged to protect, she was the guardian of a Stark legacy. In the courtyard, the blacksmith's hammer rang out, echoing against the stone walls, a comforting reminder of normalcy. Horses whickered in the stables. Dogs barked at her approach, tails wagging as if they recognized something of her steadfast, unwavering heart. She offered the beasts a gentle nod, continuing onward to greet those of the household who were eager to see the new lady of Winterfell. Old Hob, the stablemaster, was first to step forward. His balding head and lined face broke into a wide grin. "Lady Brienne," he said, and his voice carried warmth like a hand at her back. "The stables are at your disposal. I hear you come with a strong mount from Tarth's finest lines." Brienne felt an unexpectedly shy smile touch her lips. "My mare's name is Summerwind," she replied. "She's a good horse. I'll be glad to show her to you." She did not linger, though. There was much work to do, and she did not want to begin by idling. As she made her way into the keep, the loyal men and women who kept Winterfell alive curtsied or bowed. Each face turned to her with a genuine curiosity that was not free of wariness, for she was not a Stark, and the North did not forget such distinctions easily. Still, there was an undercurrent of guarded hope. Brienne's actions during the war had earned her respect across the realm, and the people here knew that if she had the Stark blessing, there had to be a good reason. Within the great hall, the old wooden pillars reminded her of the countless bannermen who had feasted beneath them, the swirling dust motes in the sunlight lending a quiet magic to the place. She paused near the dais that had once held the high seat of the Starks. One did not simply stride to that seat, one earned the privilege in the eyes of the North. She ran her hand over the well-worn wood, half expecting to hear the ghosts of the old days. Catelyn Stark, Robb Stark, Eddard Stark. Their memory felt heavy here. And with that weight came the slow-burning certainty she was meant to uphold their legacy. What would they say if they could see her now? She hoped they would approve. She closed her eyes for a long, measured breath, remembering the words Sansa had spoken just before they parted. You are the only one I trust with my home. Keep it for me, Brienne, until I or my family can return. Protect them as you protected me. Drawing back her shoulders, Brienne crossed the great hall and gently claimed her seat. A hush fell around the few watchers present as though they all shared one collective breath. The seat's cold would pressed into her body, but she held her spine straight and willed herself not to fidget. No matter what doubt she felt inside, it was time to wear the mantle of leadership. And so, she began her tenure as Lady of Winterfell. On her first morning in that new role, Brienne rose before dawn. She had always been an early riser, drawn out of sleep by her innate discipline. A knight's habit, but she knew it would serve her well. She donned a simpler dress than the one Sansa had once insisted she try. Over it, she wore an unadorned leather jerkin, lacing it tightly. She had no interest in pomp or lavish decoration. Duty came first, and she needed to appear as someone the people could rely on, not an untouchable figure perched high in unreachable finery. Even so, she did permit a small pin that bore the sigil of House Stark, one of the very few tokens given to her to signify the authority entrusted to her. The direwolf glinted silver in the torchlight as she made her way down to the courtyard where a group of men and women waited. Some were her personal guard, others were small-folk petitioners, and still more were curious watchers, their faces half-hidden in hoods against the cold. "Good morning," Brienne said. She made sure her voice carried, though she had rarely spoken to such gatherings as anything other than a knight. Yet the words flowed more easily than she expected. "I will do my best to see to your requests and your needs as soon as I can. Let us begin." Her listening ear was patient and thorough, and she quickly discovered how many challenges pressed upon Winterfell. The repairs from the war remained incomplete in certain wings of the castle. The fields needed more hands to tend them, for many had died in the battles against the Night King and later in the wars that followed. Homesteads lay abandoned, farmland overgrown. The watchtowers essential for the castle's defense were short on men. The first petitioners asked for additional timber for rebuilding, pleas for seeds to replant the farmland, or permission to open the old barrow pits to salvage building stone. Brienne carefully noted each concern, promising to dispatch resources as swiftly as possible. Winterfell's stores might be strained, warned Maester Colin, a kindly but serious man Sansa had assigned to remain with Brienne. "We must ration carefully in the coming months. Our harvest last season was meager." Brienne took no offense at his caution. She had not survived as a knight by ignoring sound advice. "We shall do our best with what we have," she said simply, "and see if the Vale or White Harbor can spare some supplies. We can repay the favor in time." A flicker of agreement passed through the group. A few northern lords had disliked the notion of relying on outsiders for help, but others recalled that Sansa had built alliances with the Vale that extended beyond fleeting necessity. Still, forging new alliances might well be part of Brienne's duty. She hated the notion of politics, but it was a sword she must learn to wield if she was to protect the land she had sworn to keep. The morning petitions stretched on, and after the last petitioner left, Brienne turned to Maester Colin. "Summon the stewards. We'll need to keep careful accounts of everything, and I want to speak with the soldiers about strengthening the watchtowers." He bowed. "Certainly, my lady." There was a slight stiffening of her shoulders at the term, but she did not correct him. The day was still young, and she wanted to see every corner of the castle. She left her guard behind, forging a path across the courtyard to examine the walls, the storerooms, the stables, mindful that leadership was more than words and promises. It was knowledge as thorough as any map. If the roof needed patching, she should see for herself how dire the leaks were. If the armory lacked swords, she wanted to gauge how many forges they might require to outfit the men. That was how her father, Lord Selwyn Tarth, always did it, not from behind a desk, but walking among the people of Evenfall Hall, seeing how they lived. Winterfell, of course, was vaster than her old home. Many corridors branched out in labyrinthine directions, and one could spend a day exploring the hot springs that heated the castle's heart. She considered the geothermal heat a marvel, a natural blessing that reminded her how resilient the North and its people were. Over centuries, they had adapted to survive the harshest winters, forging a bond with the land that was deeper than mere habit. And now she intended to be part of that bond, bridging Tarth and Winterfell, bridging the south and the north, so that House Stark's stronghold would endure with honor. The first significant test of her lordship or ladyship came on a windy afternoon barely a fortnight into her stewardship. A dispute arose between two northern families over a piece of farmland south of Winterfell. The man who claimed rightful ownership was a stoic presence with a deep red beard and a voice like thunder. The other was wiry, quick to anger, and wore a chipped sword on his belt that had evidently seen action in the war. They stood before Brienne in the great hall, each certain that the farmland, so vital for cattle, had been granted to his ancestors by the Starks generations past. Brienne had heard half a dozen witnesses by midday, each weaving a tale that overlapped but did not align. The red-bearded man insisted his father had tilled those fields since boyhood, whereas the wiry man insisted the original lines marking the land were incorrectly surveyed. Back and forth they went, voices growing heated until they were not far from coming to blows. Though she sat at the high seat, the weight of her new authority coiled in her gut, Brienne refused to let the dispute degrade into violence. She lifted a hand to quell them. "Enough," she commanded, her voice quiet but undeniably firm. In that calm restraint lay her power. "We will not have bloodshed over farmland in the Great Hall. If we are to find the truth, we shall look for older records. House Stark's archives must contain the deeds." She glanced to Maester Colin, who nodded and hurried away to rummage through the castle's historical scrolls. Brienne knew that arbitration required patience, and while they waited, she spoke plainly to both men, reminding them of the devastation the North had endured. "There has been too much loss already," she said. "Your families fought side by side. I will not let a patch of earth turn you into enemies." Her words, unembellished but earnest, seemed to resonate enough that the two men grudgingly agreed to refrain from further hostilities. When Colin returned with dusty parchments, Brienne had the men read the relevant passages, verifying the boundaries as best the old maps could describe. In the end, it became clear that the farmland in question was technically owned by the red-bearded family, but that the wiry man's father had been granted temporary grazing rights years ago, something that was never fully revoked. "So," Brienne said, looking from one to the other, "it appears that you both have claims that must be respected. We'll formalize new guidelines for usage rights, ensuring each family benefits. The farmland is, by deed, under your stewardship," she told the red-bearded man, "but you will permit the other family to graze for a reasonable fee as part of maintaining goodwill and respecting the arrangement that has long existed. In addition, you will share a portion of the spring harvest for the next 3 years to help both families recover from the war." The wiry man began to protest that it was unfair, while the other bristled at the notion of paying or receiving fees. Brienne's gaze was unflinching. "War has impoverished many. Let us not starve each other over old lines. Fairness must guide us." She paused meaningfully. "If either of you questions my judgment, you are free to present your case to Lady Sansa Stark or King Bran in King's Landing. But until that day comes, I speak with the authority of Winterfell. Do I make myself clear?" Her voice, gentle but unyielding, rang through the great hall. The men exchanged wary glances but ultimately lowered their heads in grudging respect. "Aye," they both said. Brienne nodded. "Then let us put an end to this matter." Her ruling might not have satisfied either side completely, but it was fair. That was her guiding star. In that moment, she understood that such decisions would define her leadership. The North was a rugged land of proud traditions, and the only thing that could earn true loyalty was fairness and honor, proven day by day, as tangibly as forging a new sword. As weeks turned to months, Winterfell gradually settled into the rhythm of a castle under capable governance. Food stocks were carefully managed, repairs to the outer walls and courtyards commenced, and the small folk began to perceive that the tall, steadfast woman who had once been a sword at Lady Sansa's side could indeed lead them. Yet even as Brienne earned respect, she faced challenges beyond the day-to-day disputes. From the distant hills came rumors of rogue bands. Former soldiers who had deserted during the war or had no lord to follow roamed the outskirts, at times turning to banditry. The Bear Island fleet had returned to their stronghold, leaving behind fewer patrols on the western coasts, and wildling movements in the far north always bore watching. The lords who served Winterfell were scattered, some too consumed by their own holdings to give consistent support. Brienne knew she needed to unify them. But how? Her chance arrived when Lord Wyman Manderley, that rotund but cunning master of White Harbor, sent a raven expressing interest in re-establishing trade routes. Brienne seized the opportunity to invite him and other northern lords to Winterfell for a council. She spent hours drafting letters requesting the presence of Lords Serwyn, Glover, Tallheart, Mormont, and others. She signed each missive with the Stark sigil and her name, Lady Brienne of Tarth, region of Winterfell. The arrangement felt strange, but there was no alternative. She had to gather them, reminding them of their shared purpose, a strong north under the guardianship of House Stark. If she could forge a united front, they could address the bandits, reallocate resources to rebuild, and solidify trade to bolster their economy. She had often led charges on the battlefield. How different could leading a council be? When the day came, the lords arrived in a swirl of banners, their retinues trudging through the snow-choked roads to congregate in the courtyard. Brienne welcomed them at the gate, remembering each face from the war, recalling alliances and old grudges. She greeted Lord Manderley with a respectful dip of her head. He responded with a booming laugh, praising the fish stew he had eaten on the way north. Lady Lyanna Mormont had passed in the war, so House Mormont's new head was a distant cousin, a quiet figure with steel-gray eyes. The Glovers arrived stiff and suspicious. They had been among those who doubted Brienne's appointment, but they showed no open disrespect, only caution. They met in the Great Hall. No feast was laid out, for Brienne believed that such indulgence was ill-advised when Winterfell's stores needed preserving. Instead, the table bore hearty northern fare, trenchers of bread, roasted turnips, salted fish, and ale, a modest but respectable spread. The lords assembled, and Brienne took her seat at the head, trying not to reflect on how surreal it felt. She swept her gaze across them, forging her words with care. "I have asked you here because the North's strength depends on unity," she began. "Winterfell has always been the heart of the North, and I have sworn to keep it until Lady Sansa or another Stark can return. But I cannot do it alone. Your lands need protection, your people need stability. Together, we can ensure that the North recovers from the ravages of war and thrives again." Murmurs rippled down the table. Lord Glover lifted his chin. We know your reputation, my lady. You are an honorable knight, that much is sure. But are you prepared to rule in the North, where the winters are cruel and traditions run deep? We have not forgotten that you are a Tarth, not a Stark. Brienne regarded him calmly. "I know. But I have fought for the North, bled for the North, and owe a great debt to the Starks who showed me trust when so many others scorned me. Honor is not limited by geography. If you doubt me, let us speak plainly of concerns." There was a pause. Then the new head of House Mormont cleared his throat. "We want to know how Winterfell will deal with the bandits near the gift. Our people are harassed daily. The watchtowers were undermanned and we lost more men in the wars." Brienne inclined her head. "I've heard these reports. I propose we form a united militia with contributions from each house. We can station men at the critical roads, ensuring safer travel and cutting off the bandits' supply lines. In the meantime, I will speak with Lady Sansa about sending reinforcements from the Crown's forces if she can spare them. The North cannot be left vulnerable." Lord Manderley rapped his knuckles on the table. "We're stretched thin, my lady, but White Harbor can spare some men, particularly if we receive assurances that trade along the White Knife will remain guarded. Bandits have been targeting merchant barges." Brienne nodded. "Understood, Lord Manderley. We must secure the trade routes, for food and supplies are essential." Lord Serwyn spoke next, raising concerns about the newly rebuilt holdfast on the King's Road. Their lord had lost a daughter to He war, leaving heirs uncertain and hearts heavy. Brienne listened carefully and proposed sending a small contingent of Winterfell's guard to help maintain order until the Serwyn heir came of age. One by one, each house's concerns came forward. And one by one, Brienne sought compromise, fairness, and practicality. It was not easy. The meetings stretched late into the day, with tensions occasionally flaring. Yet Brienne's unwavering patience and straightforward manner gradually chipped away at their reservations. She acknowledged the North's traditions, yet urged them to adapt to current needs. She did not claim to be a Northerner, but she proved her resolve to stand by them. Her sword might be sheathed, but the memory of her prowess on the battlefield and her unbreakable oath to House Stark lent her words a gravity that few could dismiss. By evening, they had reached a series of agreements. A plan to dispatch a united patrol to root out bandit activity, shared responsibility to assist in Winterfell's reconstruction, and a pledge of mutual defense, so no single house would stand alone in crisis. The success of the gathering did not lay only in the signed documents but also in the grudging nods and the flickers of respect in the Lord's eyes. As they departed, Lord Glover approached Brienne, giving her a curt nod. "Perhaps you can hold Winterfell after all," he said. It was the closest thing to an apology or acknowledgement of her worth that she could expect from the proud Glover. She merely inclined her head in response. I will, as long as I must. They left behind a sense of purpose in Winterfell's halls, and Brienne felt a cautious optimism. The North would not be won in a day, but each step forward counted. But even the best-laid plans can falter in the face of unforeseen storms. Such a storm came in the form of a letter bearing a dire warning that arrived on a gray, cold morning. The messenger raven tapped at the window of Brienne's solar, rousing her from the endless cycle of reports. With practiced care, she untied the tiny scroll and unrolled it. The ink was smudged, as if written in haste. Her eyes scanned the words, her heart quickening. My lady, brigands have seized Long Barrow. They've taken captives. We appeal to Winterfell for aid. Signed, Ser Lyle Leicester. Long Barrow was a small settlement near the marshy border to the east, an old burial ground where barrow mounds dotted the landscape. Its people were hardy fisherfolk and farmers. Brigands taking hostages, there was a bold move. It signaled that the lawless elements in the north were growing more confident. Brienne wasted no time. She summoned her guard captains, quickly assembling a force. She would lead them herself. In the south, perhaps some rulers might have stayed behind and sent their knights to do the fighting. But that was not Brienne's way. Action defined her, and she had promised to protect these people. They were under her care now, and the Stark seat demanded she not shirk her duty. By midday, a small mounted group departed Winterfell's gates, Brienne at the front astride Summerwind. The snows had not yet reached their fiercest depths, but the wind whipped across their cloaks and the ground crunched with frost. The men she brought were well-equipped, wearing the dire wolf insignia on their pauldrons. She rode with them in silence, mostly focused on the distant horizon. The journey took 2 days. They camped under the stars, watchful for threats. Around the campfires, Brienne observed her men exchanging nervous glances. The presence of a lady leading them was still novel for some, but no one doubted her prowess with a sword. She took her watch shifts without complaint, demonstrating that she was no different from them in her devotion to guarding the realm. On the second day, they crossed into a region of rolling barrows half covered in scrub and snow. Ahead, a thin column of smoke rose from what should have been Long Barrow. As Brienne's company drew nearer, they saw the wooden palisade was scorched in places, with fresh repairs slapped on haphazardly. 2 frightened farmers armed with pitchforks rushed forward when they recognized the dire wolf on the shields. My lady, one of them said breathlessly. The brigands have holed up in the old storehouse. They're holding nearly a dozen townsfolk inside. They've killed some of our men who tried to fight back. We're powerless. Brienne nodded once, dismounting. We'll see about that. Have they made any demands? They want gold, supplies, and they've threatened to start killing hostages if they don't get it. The man's face was etched with desperation. Brienne looked to her guard captain, Serdane, a seasoned fighter with gray streaks in his hair. We'll need to be strategic, she said. Rushing the building could endanger the hostages. Serdane nodded in agreement. We can surround the storehouse. Block their exits. Perhaps we can negotiate or at least lower their guard before we strike. That was the plan. Encircle the structure in the waning light, attempt to negotiate, and if that failed, launch a swift, precise attack. They made their preparations quickly, splitting into 2 groups. One to guard the main entrance, the other to slip around back. The storehouse was a squat, solid building with a small second floor that might offer vantage. Brienne wanted to limit casualties. She had no desire to slaughter men if there was a chance to free the hostages peacefully. But she also knew that bandits who threatened innocents rarely surrendered just for the asking. When the sun dipped low and the wind stilled, she approached the front, calling out in a clear voice, I am Brienne of Tarth, Lady of Winterfell, here to claim the release of your hostages. We have you surrounded. Let them go and we can discuss terms. Silence stretched. Then a sneering voice answered from inside. Go bugger yourself, my lady, the man mocked. Unless you've got a chest of gold and a wagon of supplies to trade, we ain't letting these folk go. You step closer, we cut their throats. Brienne steadied her breathing. The worst part was the frustration of knowing those inside were not rational men. She tried once more. Your position is hopeless. The entire North will hunt you if you kill those people. Surrender, and I'll see you're granted mercy. A coarse laugh echoed. Mercy, is it? That's what we call a noose these days. Brienne's joy tightened. She traded a look with Serdane, who shook his head. Negotiation was futile. They had to act before one of the bandits decided to make a point and harm a hostage to show they were serious. She'd seen it happen in the war, desperate men making desperate moves. She made a swift gesture. The group that flanked the rear would break in through the storehouse's back entrance while her group provided a distraction at the front. She lifted her voice again. "We have archers ready to fire if you refuse. This is your last chance." Another mocking shout. "Then fire away, my lady. We'll cut these people down if you so much as loose an arrow." That was the final confirmation. The brigands would not yield. Brienne nodded to her archers, and half a heartbeat later, a volley of arrows hissed through the air, thudding into the storehouse door and upper windows. The brigands cursed, some letting off wild crossbow bolts. Brienne raised her shield, deflecting one bolt with a resonant clang. At that precise moment, the rear group breached the door. Shouts erupted from within, followed by the clash of steel. Brienne charged forward, ramming her shoulder into the partially splintered door, her men following. The door gave way and she plunged inside. The interior was dimly lit by flickering torches, the smell of straw and sweat thick in the air. Bodies jostled in chaotic movement. A wild-eyed bandit lunged at her with an axe. She blocked the blow with her shield, the impact jarring her arm to the elbow. Her sword flashed, swift and sure, and the man fell, clutching a wound. Another brigand swung down at her from the wooden loft, forcing her to roll aside. She was back on her feet in an instant, sword raised to parry his next strike. He grunted, spitting curses, but she overpowered him with her strength, disarming him with a twist of her blade that ended in a quick, final thrust. All around, the guards of Winterfell fought, pressing the brigands. A few hostages huddled in a corner, bound and gagged. Brienne saw one bandit raise a knife toward a trembling woman, presumably to make good on his threat. Without hesitation, Brienne hurled herself forward, knocking him aside with her shield. The woman shrank away as the bandit turned his rage on Brienne. He slashed at her face, slicing the air before her nose. She ducked, hammered the pommel of her sword against his temple, and he dropped. A frantic swirl of more fighting ensued, but the tide was clearly with Brienne's men. A handful of brigands tried to flee out the back, only to meet the swords of the flanking group. Within minutes, those who survived were subdued. 2 brigands had surrendered, dropping their weapons. Others lay dead or dying. Brienne glanced around, heart-pounding, ensuring that the hostages were safe. They were. Some wept, others just stared, stunned by the sudden violence. Brienne knelt beside them, cutting their bonds with a dagger. She spoke quietly, urging them to find safety outside. Then she stood, her limbs heavy but her mind still tense. Blood dripped from a gash on her arm and she grimaced. The wound stung, but it was not deep. She directed her men to secure the prisoners, including the 2 who had surrendered. Before, as a simple knight, she might have left them for the local lord to judge. But now that duty fell to her. The thought weighed on her as she surveyed the devastation. These brigands had taken lives. Her first instinct was to pronounce the sentence for murder. But might there be more to their story? Desperation, hunger, a forced conscription by some cruel leader? As Lady of Winterfell, was there room for mercy? She had always believed in second chances for those who truly repented. Some brigands could be reformed. Others were irredeemably cruel. She would have to investigate. For now, she ordered the living captives to be bound and taken back to Winterfell for proper judgment. That night, the people of Long Barrow gathered around the small hearth of the settlement's hall, where Brienne organized aid for the wounded. Her men set up camp nearby. The villagers offered what little food they could in thanks. Brienne moved among them, ensuring each hostage was checked for injuries. They called her My Lady and clutched at her hands in gratitude. Perhaps they expected her to remain aloof, but she knelt beside them, speaking to them on their level, her voice soft and reassuring. The mission had cost a few of her own men their lives. 2 had fallen in the skirmish, and she felt the sorrow of that loss pressing into her chest. Before she retired to her modest pallet, she stood alone by the burned remnants of a small home, letting the night wind wash over her. She reflected on the line she had to walk, the warrior's path entwined with the ruler's path. As a knight, it was simpler: fight the enemy and defend the innocent. As a lady, every death weighed heavier. She was responsible for the fate of the men she commanded, the hostages she saved, the criminals she judged. None of this deterred her from her duty, it only sharpened her resolve to lead with honor. Her father had once told her that true leadership was heavier than any suit of armor she'd ever wear. Now she understood. She vowed silently to continue bearing it. If only so Sansa, when she finally returned, would find her home secure. They returned to Winterfell triumphantly, yet burdened with sorrow for those who had fallen. Word spread quickly of how the new Lady of Winterfell had personally led a rescue mission, saving townsfolk. The small folk whispered that Brienne was a warrior lady like none the North had seen in generations. The old warriors recalled the days of the she-wolf, Lyanna Stark, or the fierce spirit of Arya Stark. There was respect blossoming, perhaps even admiration. Still, banditry was not entirely quelled, and more such missions lay ahead. The North's recovery would be a long process. Brienne tackled each challenge relentlessly, day after day. She pored over the castle ledgers at night, made decisions about trade agreements in the morning, and trained the soldiers in the yard by afternoon, for she firmly believed that a lord or lady should not let their martial skills rust. She sparred with Serdane, battered her shield to splinters, and replaced it, each blow forging strength into the hearts of those who watched. She was not content to stand aside and let her men bleed on her behalf. She fought beside them, and they loved her for it. Over time, the subtle changes in Winterfell's atmosphere became apparent. The laughter of children returned to the courtyard. The blacksmith's forge roared to life with renewed vigor, crafting new weapons and armor for a growing garrison. Merchant wagons from White Harbor arrived with more frequency, carrying fish, salt, and other southern goods, exchanging them for pelts, timber, and iron ore. The watchtowers, once sparse, now had well-fed men who patrolled diligently. Letters from Sansa Stark arrived occasionally, praising Brienne for her efforts and offering what support she could. Sansa's signature and words were always full of warmth. She thanked Brienne for keeping Winterfell's heart beating, promised the realm would remember her bravery, and urged her not to neglect her own well-being. "You have always protected me, Brienne. Now you protect my home. The realm cannot ask for more. Yet I fear we will. Be strong." Brienne treasured these letters. They were precious reminders that, despite the loneliness of leadership, she was not alone in the world. Her kinship with Sansa transcended distance, bound by a loyalty that ran deeper than blood. The responsibilities might be great, but in Sansa she had a steadfast friend who understood the burden of power. Seasons wore on, the North creeping into the cusp of another winter. It would not be as devastatingly harsh as the long night, but every northerner remained vigilant. The nights lengthened, the winds sharpened. Snow piled against Winterfell's walls. Yet the heart trees in the Godwood stood silent witness, their red leaves a stark contrast against the whiteness. The hot springs continued to warm the castle's interior. Fires crackled in the hearths, and the kitchens bustled with stew pots and bread ovens. Life carried on with a hushed determination. During one of those crisp afternoons, Brienne visited the Godwood. She removed her gloves, letting the cold nip at her fingers, and rested a calloused palm on the trunk of the weirwood. The carved face looked down at her with solemn eyes. This was the place where the ancient Starks prayed, where they sought guidance. She closed her eyes, not quite sure what she believed about the old gods, but comforted by the tradition and the quiet. A soft voice broke the silence. "My lady?" She turned to see Podrick Payne, her loyal squire, no, her loyal knight now, for he had earned his knighthood fighting by her side in the war. She had asked him to remain with her in Winterfell, for he was as dedicated and good-hearted a companion as she could hope for. He stood there with his helm in hand, looking somewhat uneasy at having intruded. "Come, Podrick," she said gently. He stepped forward, glancing around as though uncertain. "Are you all right, my lady? The council was worried you might be troubled." She forced a small smile. "I'm fine. Merely reflecting." Podrick hesitated, then cleared his throat. "We had news from the Vale. Lady Sansa is delayed in King's Landing. Something about negotiations with the Iron Islands. It seems we'll have no visitors for a while." He paused. "You have done so much, my lady. The people here, they truly follow you. But I can see how heavy it weighs on you." Brienne lowered her gaze, her breath clouding the air. She recalled the times she told Podrick that a knight must be prepared to bear any burden. Yet she knew he spoke from concern. "It is heavier than any sword I've ever lifted, Pod. But so long as I can serve the Starks, I'll bear it." He gave a nod, admiration in his eyes. "Then let me help you in any way I can." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already do more than you know." They left the Godwood, footsteps crunching on the icy ground, returning to the tasks that awaited them. Winter's nights were long, but they also had a hush that gave time for introspection. In her chambers, once used by the ladies of House Stark, Brienne sat by the fire, reading over accounts of the day. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes weary. The flickering light danced across the wood-paneled walls. She had grown used to these quarters, though she kept them as sparse as possible. A sturdy bed, a simple chest for her clothes, a writing desk, and her sword stand in the corner. Her armor rested on a rack by the door. On the desk was a half-finished letter to Sansa. Brienne's quill hovered above the parchment, ink blotting. She struggled to put her emotions into words. Should she admit her loneliness? Should she confess the nights she woke in a cold sweat, dreaming of White Walkers or the sorrowful eyes of those she could not save? That she sometimes doubted her ability to be both warrior and lady? In the end, she settled for a measured honesty. She wrote of the progress with the harvest, the alliances between lords, and the improvement of Winterfell's walls. Then she added a short line about her own state. I remain determined to do my duty, though I sometimes wonder what the old gods think of a woman not of the north occupying this place. But if the measure of a ruler is their willingness to protect and serve, I hope they find me worthy. She signed it with her name, sealed it with the Stark sigil, and resolved to hand it to a raven in the morning. A soft knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she said, placing the quill aside. Maester Colin entered, carrying a small tray of tea. "You've been at the ledgers all day, my lady. I thought you might like something warm before bed." She inclined her head in gratitude. "Thank you, Maester. Always thoughtful." He set the tray down and his gaze flickered over her bandaged forearm, which still bore the healing wound from Long Barrow. "I see you changed the dressing, but do let me check it tomorrow to ensure no infection sets in." She offered a thin smile. "I will." She sipped the tea, savoring the gentle warmth trickling down her throat. Colin lingered, hands folded. "If I may say so, my lady, you've done wonders for Winterfell. It has been long since we've seen such stability. Yet I worry you don't allow yourself a moment's rest. Even the most valiant knight must lay down their sword occasionally." "I will rest when the north is safe," she said, half teasing but also serious. "There's still too much to do." Colin bowed his head. "Very well. Just don't forget that your strength serves the realm best when you preserve it. Good night, my lady." Brienne nodded, watching him go. The door closed softly, leaving her to the faint crackle of the fire. She stared into the flames, recalling the day's events, the sound of swords in training, the pleas of a mother worried about her son's fever, the new shipment of grain from White Harbor. She carried it all on her shoulders, an invisible cloak of responsibilities. Yet in that weight she found purpose. Wasn't this what she had always longed for? To serve a noble cause, to protect and to uphold honor? In the pages of chivalric tales, knights who protected great halls were revered. But in reality, those halls needed more than a sword arm. They needed a guiding hand, empathy, patience, a willingness to shoulder burdens for an entire people. Brienne finished her tea, letting the warmth banish the lingering chill, and resolved to sleep. She needed her strength for the day to come, for each dawn brought new challenges. She extinguished the lamp and banked the fire, her final thought a silent prayer to whatever gods might listen. "Let me protect them all." Snow muffled footsteps in the courtyard, and a hush filled the air in the pre-dawn stillness. Brienne rose as she always did, stepping into her boots and cloak, venturing out to check on the castle's watchers, ensuring no threat lurked beyond the walls. She found only the quiet starlight, the occasional guard who straightened and saluted. After a sparse breakfast, she made her way to the armory, where the master-at-arms was drilling some new recruits. She leaned against the door, watching for a moment. Young men and women swung practice swords, their breath visible in the cold. Their forms were passable, but she could see improvement was needed. She recalled her own years of training in Tarth, how every misstep left a bruise on her body and her pride. But she persevered. "Master-at-arms," she called, stepping forward. "Mind if I lend a hand?" He gave a quick bow. "Certainly, my lady." Brienne shed her cloak and took up a wooden practice sword. She beckoned a young recruit, a girl no older than 16 with flaming red hair. "Show me your stance," she said. The girl squared up, hands trembling slightly, but eyes fierce. Brienne corrected her grip, guiding her feet into a stronger position. "Balance," she advised. "A sword cannot find its mark if your feet are unsteady." They exchanged a few blows, Brienne going easy at first. Then, seeing potential in the girl's posture, she pressed a bit harder. The recruit grimaced but held her ground, and a spark of determination lit her eyes. After disarming her, Brienne offered a hand to help her back to her feet. "You'll make a fine soldier," Brienne said. "Train hard." The girl beamed, and the onlookers murmured among themselves. Brienne proceeded to spar with several others, ensuring each had a turn. Her presence gave them a jolt of excitement. There was no dishonor in being knocked down by the Lady of Winterfell, who was renowned for her skill. By the time she left, the recruits were flushed and panting, but also wearing proud, hopeful smiles. It occurred to her that they found inspiration in her story. A woman knight who now ruled in a land once dominated by men. If that spurred them to train harder, so much the better. Ruling Winterfell involved as much diplomacy as martial prowess, however. Late that afternoon, Lord Edison Serwyn arrived unexpectedly, bearing grave news. A cousin of his had vanished near the Wolfswood. Some suspected foul play. Could be outlaws, Lord Edison said, pacing in Brienne's solar. They've grown bolder, my lady. We must find her before it's too late. Brienne studied his anxious face. We have scouts in that area, but I can send more. Do you have any leads? The Serwyn lord shook his head, frustration etched in every line of his posture. All we know is she was traveling to her holding and she never arrived. Without hesitation, Brienne promised assistance. The next day, she dispatched additional scouts to comb the Wolfswood. Day after day, the search continued. She personally rode out to meet the scouts, coordinating efforts. At one point, she ventured into the forest herself, the old trees looming overhead, their branches laden with snow. The Wolfswood had always been a place of wild beauty, but it could be treacherous too. After a week of searching, they finally found her, unfortunately lifeless. The outlaws had robbed her and left her body near a stream. Brienne felt a rush of anger, sorrow, and guilt. She and her men had done all they could, but still, they had arrived too late. She escorted the remains back to House Serwyn, offering her condolences. She promised that those responsible would be hunted down. Back in Winterfell, she gathered intelligence from every contact she had, determined to put an end to these criminals. The frustrations of such ongoing threats weighed heavily. Yet in every meeting, every plan, she was unwavering. This was the cost of leadership, to face tragedies you could not prevent and to keep striving nonetheless. Winter deepened, coating the land in white silence. The roads became more difficult, the nights colder. Wolf tracks sometimes appeared near the perimeter, reminding everyone that nature, too, could be a threat. Brienne kept the fires stoked and her soldiers vigilant. Supplies were rationed carefully, but with the help of White Harbor and the newly reopened trade channels, they avoided the dire shortages that plagued them in the past. During one bleak morning, a messenger from King's Landing arrived. He brought letters not just from Sansa but also from Queen Daenerys's court. Though Daenerys no longer ruled after the war, her legacy had led to a restructured governance, with King Bran's small council now administering many tasks. The letter in question was an invitation for a grand summit, a gathering of all the major lords and ladies in the realm to discuss forging new laws, including ones about the rights of small folk and the rebuilding of areas ravaged by the wars. Brienne read the missive thoughtfully. Such a gathering could be crucial for the North, but it would require her presence in King's Landing for an extended period. Her gaze drifted to the window where flakes of snow whirled. Could she leave Winterfell? Would the castle run smoothly in her absence? She had never hungered for the politics of the capital. Yet perhaps this was a chance to secure more resources for her people. Maester Colin's voice broke her reverie. It could be an opportunity to assert the North's needs, my lady. You may also press for stricter laws against brigandry. But travel during this season will be difficult. And leaving Winterfell, you must choose carefully who would govern in your place. Brienne nodded. Yes, if I go, I must leave someone capable behind. Ser Dane or Podrick might manage the guards, but they are not prepared to deal with lords. Lord Glover is too preoccupied with his own land. Lord Serwyn is in mourning. Lord Manderley is in White Harbor, far from here. She paused, frustration welling. I cannot simply abandon my duties. At the same time, ignoring the needs of the realm could harm the North as well. She mulled it over for days, sending messages to Sansa for advice. Ultimately, the Raven arrived with a simple note: the choice is yours, Brienne. The realm would benefit from your wisdom, but I trust you to do what is right for Winterfell. In the end, Brienne decided the North would not be well served if she left in the grip of winter to attend a summit that might last weeks, perhaps months. She penned a polite refusal, citing the difficulties of travel and her essential duties, but promised to send a representative in her stead, someone who could convey her voice. After careful deliberation, she chose Maester Colin. Though not a lord, a maester carried official standing and could handle negotiations at a basic level. Before he departed, she entrusted him with a list of requests, from the expansion of northern roads to stricter penalties for outlaws. She sealed it with the dire wolf, feeling a pang of regret that she could not go herself. But the well-being of Winterfell must come first. Time became a tapestry of challenges met and victories hard won. Under Brienne's stewardship, Winterfell's people found security in the midst of winter's harsh cold. The outlaws never fully vanished, but their ranks diminished as armed patrols and a better organized defense made the North less welcoming for criminals. Trade routes stabilized and new stores of grain and salted meats arrived. The castle's morale improved as well, laughter echoed through the corridors, and even the old ghosts of war seemed quieter. Brienne was tireless. She could often be found in the library at odd hours, poring over historical accounts of how previous lords of Winterfell managed tough seasons. She studied old treaties, gleaned knowledge from each new scroll about the ways the Starks navigated the interplay of tradition and necessity. In time, a subtle but distinct camaraderie formed between her and the Northern Lords. They may not have fully embraced her as a Stark, but they recognized her sincerity and her iron sense of duty. Occasionally, she received letters from the South that stirred old memories. One from Jaime Lannister arrived brief, laden with regrets and apologies. He wrote from Casterly Rock, where he was helping to rebuild what remained of his house's fortunes. The words were weighted with the past they shared, a complex bond forged in fire and lost in the tumult of war. Brienne set the letter aside, uncertain of how to answer. That part of her life felt distant. She had new vows now, a cause that consumed her heart more fully than she had imagined possible. On a rare respite, she found herself in Winterfell's training yard at dusk. Most of the castle slept, but she needed to ease the tension in her muscles. She lifted a practice sword, heavy oak wrapped with hide, and ran through a series of forms. Her breath billowed in the cold air, and each swing brought a measure of release. She was so engrossed that she barely noticed when someone approached. Turning, she saw Podrick standing there, silently observing. "You can join me, you know," she said, smiling wryly. He nodded. "I'd be honored, my lady." They sparred, the wooden blades striking with hollow cracks. Podrick had grown skilled over the years, more confident in his movements. Yet he could not match her power and precision. She disarmed him after a short exchange, though he lasted longer than he would have in the early days. He stood there, panting, a grin curling his lips despite defeat. "You've improved," Brienne remarked. He grinned wider. "You're teaching, my lady." She returned a faint smile and lowered her practice sword. "Thank you for being at my side, Podrick." He dipped his head, sincere as ever. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." They both stood quietly for a moment, the cold wind rustling across the snow-covered yard. Then they put away the practice swords and parted ways, returning to the warmth of the keep. As winter's cold grip lingered, another letter arrived, this one from Arya Stark, delivered by a gray-feathered raven. The note was as terse and direct as Arya herself. She wrote that she still roamed distant lands, charting unknown seas, but she thought of home often and was relieved to hear that Brienne was tending to Winterfell. It ended with a cryptic line, "Maybe I'll see you sooner than you think. Take care of our wolves." Brienne smiled at the thought of Arya out there somewhere, free and fierce as ever. She remembered the girl's quicksilver steel in the Godswood, how she never seemed to let fear or doubt slow her. Yet in the letter's brevity, Brienne sensed the gratitude Arya felt. That feeling of connection to the Stark family warmed her heart more than any fire could. She was not of their blood, but she was bound to them all the same. Thus, the winter weeks passed, each day etched with duty, small triumphs, and the unflagging resolve of a knight who had become a lady. One pale morning, after nearly 2 years of her stewardship, the watchman sounded a horn. A rider approached the gates, bearing the Stark banner. Brienne hurried to the walls, scanning the road with sharp eyes. A small party of travelers emerged from the swirling snow, their horses plodding forward. As they drew closer, she recognized the figure at the head, tall, cloaked in thick furs, a hood covering all but her red hair. Brienne's heart kicked in her chest. Sansa Stark had returned to Winterfell. With deliberate speed, Brienne descended to the courtyard. The gates opened, allowing Sansa and her retinue to enter. As Sansa swung down from her horse, her gaze swept the courtyard, taking in the changes that had been wrought since she left. Then she turned toward Brienne. A radiant smile lit her face, though it was touched with weariness from her journey. "My lady," Brienne said, stepping forward, pausing to bow as custom demanded. Sansa laughed, her breath fogging the air, and embraced Brienne fiercely. "None of that," she murmured. "You have kept my home safe, Brienne. This is your place as much as mine now." Brienne's throat tightened with emotion as she returned the hug. When they pulled apart, she studied Sansa's face. It held the same graceful composure as ever, but older, etched by responsibility and the trials of leadership in King's Landing. "Winterfell has prospered under your care, I hear," Sansa said softly. "I've had so many reports of the changes you've made." "Thank you." "It was my duty," Brienne replied, voice hushed. "But I am glad you're home." Sansa's eyes glistened. "As am I." The courtyard bustled around them as servants rushed to take horses and unload supplies. The watchers on the wall peered down in reverence, for the Lady of Winterfell had returned, though in truth there had been a Lady of Winterfell all along in Brienne. Now, together, they would share the mantle. Sansa glanced at Brienne's Stark pin. "You have worn the symbol well, I see. Are you ready to relinquish your seat, or do you wish to remain by my side?" Brienne straightened. I am at your service, Lady Stark. I will remain in any role you see fit. For a moment Sansa said nothing, her gaze lingering on Brienne's face. Then she responded firmly, Come. We have much to speak about, and I think there is a place for both of us in Winterfell's future. They gathered in the great hall that evening, a modest feast arranged in Sansa's honor. The lords who could travel in winter arrived, eager to pay homage. It was a celebration tinged with the quiet knowledge of how much had changed since the days when Sansa first left. Brienne stood at Sansa's side, introducing her to new faces and updating her on old disputes. Lord Glover and Lady Mormont's cousin offered warm welcomes, praising Brienne's leadership. Even Lord Serwyn, still sorrowful from his cousin's loss, commended the swift justice Brienne dealt to the outlaws. Sansa nodded thoughtfully at each tale, listening to how Brienne had resolved disputes, rebuilt watchtowers, and negotiated trade. Between courses, Sansa laid a gentle hand on Brienne's arm. You have grown into your power, I see, she said. And the North respects you for it. Brienne bowed her head slightly. I only did what was necessary. Sansa's eyes sparkled. And yet, that's everything. By night's end, the hall was clearing. Servants extinguished torches, leaving only a few guttering flames. Sansa beckoned Brienne to walk with her, leading her through corridors half-lit by moonlight, eventually reaching the ramparts of Winterfell's outer wall. They gazed out at the snow-covered expanse, the moon hanging low, silvering the frosted landscape. Sansa's breath was visible in the cold air. I've been fighting battles of ink and parchment in King's Landing, forging alliances to keep the realm stable. But there is nothing like returning to these stones, to the smell of northern air. I feel I can finally breathe. Brienne nodded, recalling her own sense of belonging that had grown here. Winterfell is special, she murmured. It always felt more like home than Tarth did, in a strange way. Sansa's gaze slid over. I understand. After all, I found my courage here, found a kind of purpose I never had anywhere else. She paused, letting silence settle. Brienne, I want you to remain Lady of Winterfell with me. I know I am the Stark by blood, but you have earned your place. I have duties that may call me away again. Arya is traveling. Bran is consumed with ruling. Someone must remain steadfast here. I can think of no one better than you to share my seat. Brienne's eyes widened. She had never aspired to keep the title once a true Stark returned. My lady. I'm honored, but Sansa shook her head, a gentle smile on her lips. No buts. You've learned the intricacies of governance, proved you care for these people. They look to you. Stay, rule beside me. When I must be away, you will bear the mantle alone. Together, House Stark will endure. Brienne felt an unexpected swirl of emotion. She had prepared herself to step aside, to return to a simpler existence, perhaps as a sworn shield again. Yet now Sansa offered her a partnership that acknowledged her place in Winterfell's story. She swallowed thickly. If that is what you wish, then I shall accept. For you. For the North. Sansa exhaled a breath of relief. It is what I wish. We are stronger together. They lingered on the ramparts, side by side, looking out over the domain they both loved. Brienne felt the weight of leadership still on her shoulders, but now it did not feel quite so lonely. The mantle was shared, and in that sharing it became lighter. The days that followed saw the official acknowledgement. Brienne of Tarth retained her title as Lady of Winterfell, recognized by the Northern Lords in concert with Sansa Stark. The pair presided over judgments in the Great Hall, dividing responsibilities between them. Sansa, skilled in diplomacy, handled the more intricate political matters, while Brienne, proven in warfare and justice, saw to the realm's defenses and the day-to-day welfare of the people. The arrangement worked seamlessly. Each day, they conferred in the solar, exchanging updates, offering opinions, and ensuring no detail was overlooked. They formed a council of advisors, Lord Manderley for trade, Lord Glover for defense, and a smattering of knights and stewards. And through it all, the people saw that Winterfell had not one caretaker, but two. One was a Stark by blood, the other a Stark by choice. When the roads opened further in early spring, visitors from the south began arriving, curious to see the stronghold that had been so resilient. Some came seeking alliances, others simply to marvel at the newly solidified rule. Brienne greeted them with measured courtesy, still not fully at ease with the pomp, but doing her best to honor both tradition and practicality. She insisted visitors witness Winterfell's progress firsthand: the rebuilt ramparts, the bustling courtyard, the training of new recruits, and many left with admiration for what a once war-torn castle had become under her stewardship. Through it all, Sansa watched Brienne with quiet pride. Occasionally, She would tease Brienne about her reluctance to wear finer dresses or her straightforward manner in negotiations. "You are still the same woman who dedicated her life to protecting me," she said once with a teasing smile. "Yet I see how the people look at you now, with a reverence I suspect you hardly notice." Brienne flushed and used to praise. "I only do what needs doing," she repeated. Sansa nodded. "And that, dear friend, is what makes you beloved." The final piece of Brienne's acceptance came after spring's thaw, when the snows receded enough for the small folk to gather in Winterfell for a festival. They had not truly celebrated anything since the war's aftermath, but Sansa and Brienne decided a day of feasting and games would lift spirits, and also honor the memory of those who had sacrificed so much. Tents sprang up in the courtyard, colorful banners snapping in the mild breeze. Musicians played lively tunes, children chased each other with shrieks of laughter, and the smell of roasted meats and spiced honey cakes filled the air. The entire castle seemed to breathe out tension, if only for a day. Brienne initially felt out of place in a revelry, for her instincts always told her to remain vigilant. But Sansa convinced her to walk among the people, to accept their gratitude and share their joy. She moved through the crowd in a simple tunic and breeches, with just a small cloak pinned at her shoulder by the Stark sigil. People paused to bow or curtsy, but she waved off formalities. She smiled, awkward but sincere, as they offered thanks. A blacksmith's daughter handed her a flower wreath. An old woman patted her arm and called her our Knight of the North. Eventually, Brienne found herself near a makeshift stage where a troupe performed a humorous skit about knights and dragons. As she watched, Sansa slipped up beside her, sliding an arm through Brienne's. "Look at them," Sansa whispered, nodding to the common folk who gazed up at the performance, faces alight. "They are laughing, dancing, enjoying themselves. And you helped make this possible." Brienne glanced down, her voice low with humility. "We all did. You did. The other lords. The small folk themselves." Sansa squeezed her arm. "That's true. But you see that girl in the front row, the one who looks at you with stars in her eyes?" She pointed discreetly to a young girl who clutched a wooden sword, presumably an imitation of Brienne's. "She sees a woman who taught the world that honor and courage can transcend any boundary. She sees a lady of Winterfell who rides with the guards, who bears her sword and shield in defense of the weak. You are an inspiration, Brienne." The tall Night Lady inhaled slowly, her eyes stinging with unexpected emotion. She had never thought of herself that way, an inspiration? She was only following her vows, doing what was needed. But in that girl's eyes, in Sansa's eyes, she was something more. Perhaps that was the final piece of acceptance, the understanding that she had become part of the North's legend in her own right. As the skit concluded and the crowd burst into cheers, Brienne stood there, letting the applause wash over them. Somewhere in the din, she caught the girl's bright gaze. The girl lifted her wooden sword in silent salute. Brienne felt a smile tug at her lips, and she returned the salute with a slight bow. It seemed the final seal of the North's regard, this festival, this genuine outpouring of gratitude and hope. At long last, the nightmares of war felt distant, replaced by the promise of rebuilding and the forging of a new era. And in that era, Brienne of Tarth was no longer just a wandering knight in search of honor. She was Lady of Winterfell, standing proudly at Sansa Stark's side, upholding a legacy that spanned centuries. Night settled over the festival, torches and lanterns illuminating the courtyard in a warm glow. Music played on, and some danced in the flickering light, while others wandered off to their beds, content and full. Brienne found her way to the ramparts again, drawn to the hush of the starlit sky. She leaned against the cold stone, gazing at the heavens. Each star shimmered, tiny beacons of light in the darkness. She thought of the journey that had led her here, mocked in her youth for her stature, devoting herself to a knight's code she believed in wholeheartedly, failing at times but never abandoning her principles. She had guarded Renly Baratheon, Catelyn Stark, and ultimately dedicated herself to Sansa and Arya Stark. Many times she thought her life would end on a battlefield or else fade away after the war. Instead, she found herself draped in the mantle of leadership she never sought, yet wore with unflinching resolve. The stones under her hands were the same ones that Ned Stark had walked upon, that generations of Starks had trodden. She felt their presence as if they stood behind her, guardians of the North spirit. Perhaps they, too, approved of her at last. She closed her eyes and let the wind brush her cheeks, recalling the simple vow she'd made in the godwood long ago to protect and serve. She had kept that vow. She would keep it until her last breath. Behind her, the faint sound of footsteps made her open her eyes. Turning, she saw Sansa approach. The moonlight cast a gentle silver hue on the Lady of Winterfell's auburn hair. She joined Brienne at the wall, staring out over the snowy fields. For a long moment, neither spoke, content to share the quiet. Finally, Sansa said softly, "It's beautiful, isn't it? This land, this night, this peace. I used to dream of it when I was far away." Brienne nodded. "Yes, it is." They stood side by side, two women who had endured the forging fires of war, heartbreak, and struggle only to emerge as guardians of the North. The festival's music drifted on the night breeze, mingling with the hush of distant forests. "Thank you, Brienne," Sansa whispered. "For everything. When I asked you to protect me all those years ago, I never knew the full measure of what you could give. You have gone beyond every hope I had." Brienne's voice caught in her throat. "You've done as much for me, my lady. You gave me a purpose, a place to belong." Sansa's hand found Brienne's and she squeezed gently. "We both belong here." They fell silent again, letting the moment speak for itself. Below them, Winterfell's courtyard glowed with torchlight and joy. Beyond the castle walls, the north stretched into infinite darkness, wild and cold, yet also brimming with life. And above, the stars glistened over them like blessings from old gods and new alike. Thus did Brienne of Tarth stand, not as an interloper, but as Lady of Winterfell, beloved by the people, cherished by the Starks, and bound to protect this land as fiercely as if it were her own blood. For in many ways it was. She had earned the North's respect through sacrifice and unwavering loyalty, forging a legacy that stood beside the ancient name of Stark. And as the long night of war gave way to a dawn of hope, her story was woven into Winterfell's tapestry forevermore, a living testament that honor, courage, and devotion could elevate even an unlikely champion into the heart of the North's proudest home. In the days that followed the Winterfell festival, the castle's renewed sense of unity and hope glowed like an ember in the hearts of its people. The bond between Brienne and Sansa seemed to fill every corridor with quiet reassurance. The North had been through storms unimaginable, yet here it stood unbowed, guided by two women whose strength complemented each other's in ways few could have foreseen. Winter had not fully departed, pockets of ice and wind still lurked in the shadows, but the promise of spring was unmistakable. In drips and starts, the ice receded and fresh shoots of grass emerged in the fields. In that subtle shift of seasons, another chapter of Winterfell's story began to unfold. Brienne's morning routine remained unchanged. She woke before the dawn, pulling on practical clothing, woolen breeches, a thick undershirt, and sometimes a simple jerkin if the chill was sharp, and then walked the ramparts or the courtyard to meet the guards on night watch. She still believed a leader should be visible, approachable. Over time, she recognized most of the men and women on duty by name, greeting them with a polite word or a nod. That simple courtesy went a long way. They respected her not because she was unreachable on a throne, but because she stood with them in the frost of pre-dawn, checking on the castle's defenses. It was a routine that grounded her, a link to the years she had served as a knight and not a lady. One particular morning, she found Sansa had beat her to the courtyard, already talking with the steward about a shipment of seeds needed for the farmland beyond the winter town. A delicate hoarfrost coated the courtyard stones, shimmering in the thin light. Brienne paused at a short distance, taking in the sight, Sansa, wrapped in a gray fur cloak, her auburn hair catching faint glimmers of dawn. The younger woman's voice was calm and precise as she directed the steward on how to distribute the seeds to families in need. Brienne remembered Sansa's early days when she had been more cautious, more reserved, her smile half-veiled, her words chosen carefully. The Sansa who stood before her now was confident in the role that had once weighed on her like a chain. She was every inch the Lady of Winterfell, bearing the weight of her lineage with quiet pride. Perhaps the transformation was akin to Brienne's own, forging identity through trials and heartbreak, forging leadership in the crucible of necessity. They shared the bond, each having grown into a role they never imagined for themselves as young girls. When Sansa finished, she looked up and spotted Brienne. Her smile was instant. "Good morning," she said, stepping closer. "Good morning," Brienne replied. "You were up early." Sansa shrugged lightly, turning to walk with her across the courtyard. "I couldn't sleep. My mind was buzzing with thoughts about new farmland to cultivate, trade routes to improve, those sorts of things. Does that ever happen to you?" "All the time." Brienne's smile was small but genuine. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of sword fights and patrols. Ruling is a different kind of battle." Sansa's expression grew more thoughtful. "Yes, it is. But we're not alone in it. That helps." She looped her arm through Brienne's, a gesture that was both affectionate and confident. "Did you sleep well?" "About as well as I usually do," Brienne answered, leaving unsaid the fact that her sleep was often interrupted by half-remembered dreams or a sense of restlessness. Truth be told, despite the warmth she felt in Winterfell, a part of her still carried old scars, echoes of battles, the memory of dire threats. There was always a piece of her on watch, even in slumber. Together, they proceeded toward the great hall where the castle's life was already stirring. Kitchen staff bustled about, preparing a modest breakfast. The smell of fresh bread clung to the air. A few petitioners were drifting in, hoping for an early audience. Sansa and Brienne exchanged a quick, knowing look. Their roles would soon begin for the day. By mid-morning, they sat in the great hall, side by side on the dais that showcased the high seat of Winterfell. The seat had once been carved for the Starks, the arms worn smooth by centuries of those who governed. Another chair, simpler but stately, had been placed beside it for Brienne. A tapestry behind them displayed the dire wolf in silver thread, set against the northern gray. The arrangement always struck visitors as unusual, two women leading side by side, each commanding respect in her own way. The petitioners came in a steady stream. A woman from the winter town who had lost her husband to raiders last year now struggled to pay taxes on her small plot. A cluster of blacksmiths requested more iron shipments from White Harbor. A traveling bard, newly arrived from the Riverlands, offered to compose songs if Winterfell would sponsor his stay. Each matter was heard. Sansa and Brienne conferred briefly, then resolved the issues as fairly as possible. Sometimes they referred petitioners to sub-stewards if the matter was more specialized, but most concerns were decided on the spot. And in each decision, one could see Sansa's political astuteness blend with Brienne's emphasis on directness and honor. By noon, the crowd thinned. Sansa stood, stretching her neck. "Let's take a walk," she said to Brienne quietly. "I need fresh air." They left the great hall and ventured out onto the walls. The sun had risen higher, offering the pale gentleness of a northern spring day. From the ramparts, they could see beyond Winterfell's walls, the open fields, the thin ribbon of the King's Road, the humble collection of homes that formed the winter town. Distantly, farmland lay in dark patches where snow had melted. Faint hints of green promised new growth. Occasionally, they caught sight of farmers and shepherds going about their tasks. Sansa rested her hands on the stone, her gaze sweeping the horizon. "It's been nearly 3 years since the worst of the war ended," she said in a hushed tone. "And sometimes I still wake up expecting to see White Walkers or to hear the cry that another southern army is marching against us." Brienne nodded, standing beside her. "I understand. War leaves more scars than those on the body." Her left hand reflexively touched her right forearm, where a bandit's blade had once cut deep, leaving a thin mark that had not fully faded. "But you've guided the North through it." "We both have." Sansa's lips curved gently. "Do you ever think about what life might have been if none of that had happened? If we had known peace from the start?" Brienne took a moment to consider. "I might have remained on Tarth, a lady unremarkable. You might have been wed off in some arranged match. I suspect neither of us would be who we are. We found our strengths in adversity. It shaped us for better or for worse." Sansa nodded. "Yes, it did." She lifted her chin slightly, as if tasting the breeze. "I think I've grown to love the North more than I ever did before. Even the cold. It reminds me of home, of resilience." They watched as a flock of crows took flight from the trees. Brienne let the quiet stretch out, mindful of Sansa's reflective mood. Sometimes, in these unguarded moments, she caught glimpses of the girl Sansa used to be, dreamy, hopeful, uncertain. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone tempered and keenly aware of the burdens of power. That was how it went for all of them. The war had forced them to shed illusions, to become sharper versions of themselves. Soon, their duties beckoned again. They descended into the courtyard, parted ways as Sansa needed to meet with Lord Manderley's envoys about the shipping of goods up the White Knife. Brienne took a moment to greet Podrick Payne, who had just returned from a patrol near the Wolfswood. Podrick's cheeks were rosy from the ride, his cloak dusted with bits of mud and melting snow. "All is quiet along that stretch, my lady," he reported. "A few travelers on the road, but no sign of bandits." Brienne clapped a hand on his shoulder, relieved. "That's good to hear." Though the North had settled considerably under her watch, there were still pockets of lawlessness. She had not forgotten the brutality of those who preyed on the vulnerable. "Take some rest, Pod." "Yes, my lady." His eyes flickered with the same admiration that had glowed there since he first became her squire. Now he was nearly her peer, a seasoned knight in his own right, but the respect never faltered. Brienne felt a pang of warmth. In a world that had often been cruel to her, Podrick's unwavering loyalty remained one of her dearest comforts. After parting ways with Pod, Brienne moved through Winterfell with purposeful strides. She passed the forges, where blacksmiths hammered out horseshoes and spearheads, the clang of metal filling the air. She stopped briefly at the kennels to pat the hounds, remembering that the Starks were once famed for their dire wolves. She wondered if Nymeria, Ghost, or any of the other wolves were still roaming the wilderness, but she kept such thoughts to herself. Then she proceeded to her next appointment, training with some of the new recruits. The Master-at-Arms had requested her oversight for advanced drills, wanting the recruits to see how a true knight handled a blade. In the training yard, the recruits formed a circle when Brienne arrived. She wore a padded gambeson, her hair tied back, a longsword belted at her side. She stepped into the ring, nodding in greeting to each young face. Some were the same ones she had seen months ago, their scrawny frames now starting to fill out, their grips on the hilts more confident. A few newcomers looked nervous, but also thrilled at the chance to train under the Lady of Winterfell herself. "Form up," Brienne commanded. "You're to practice your footwork and strikes. Let's see if all the training you've had so far holds steady." They paired off, wooden swords clacking as they ran through the drills. Brienne walked among them, occasionally nudging a wrist to correct grip or tapping a shin to adjust stance. When she spotted an egregious mistake, she had them repeat it until they got it right. She was strict, but never cruel. Learning the sword was hard. She remembered the jeers and humiliations of her own early lessons on Tarth, surrounded by boys who doubted her. Here, no one mocked these recruits, no one belittled them for their backgrounds or appearances. A testament, perhaps, to the culture Brienne and Sansa had fostered in Winterfell. All might serve so long as they showed heart and skill. Eventually, Brienne singled out one particularly swift recruit, a lad named Ronald with a wiry frame and quick reflexes. "You spar with me," she said, drawing her own wooden practice sword. She beckoned him forward. "Come, show me what you've learned." Ronald swallowed, but squared his shoulders. "Yes, my lady." They circled each other on the packed dirt of the yard, the onlookers whispering in excitement. Ronald lunged, clearly hoping to catch Brienne off guard. She sidestepped easily, tapping him on the shoulder with her wooden blade. "Don't overcommit," she chided. "Stay balanced." He recovered, feinted, and tried another angle. This time she parried with effortless grace. A few beats passed as they exchanged blows. He improved once he got over his initial nerves, but she could sense his lack of real battle experience. She caught his next strike with her blade and pivoted, letting him stumble a step before twisting his sword out of his hand. She ended the display by pressing the tip of her practice weapon lightly to his chest. His chest rose and fell in rapid pants, but his eyes shone with admiration. "You're fast, my lady," he managed, stepping back. Brienne lowered her sword. "Speed is only part of it. You must keep control. Don't let your opponent's size or reputation unnerve you. Use your own strengths. Agility, cunning." She inclined her head. "You did well for a beginner." He beamed, and the others in the yard applauded softly. Brienne offered a small smile. "Take a short rest, then go back to drills." While the recruits dispersed to fetch water and catch their breath, Brienne sheathed her practice sword. She could have lingered longer, but the day's demands called her. She left them to the Master-at-Arms and made her way to a smaller courtyard where Sansa had arranged a meeting with Lord Clay Serwyn, who had recently come of age to lead House Serwyn in his own right. Lord Serwyn stood near a brazier, warming his hands. He was tall, slender, with a guarded expression that reminded Brienne of how the North held onto its grief. His father and sister had both died in the wars, leaving him to inherit a title he hadn't been prepared for. Sansa was in the midst of exchanging pleasantries with him, her tone measured and kind. When Brienne joined them, Sansa turned with a welcoming smile. "Lord Serwyn has just been telling me about the winter stocks at his lands. They're running quite low, but he hopes to plant soon. Isn't that right, my lord?" He nodded, turning to Brienne. "Yes, my lady. Our stores are almost depleted. If the planting doesn't yield enough, we'll be forced to rely on trade we can barely afford." Brienne inclined her head. "We might divert surplus from White Harbor. Or, if you have need, we can arrange a tempora. Re-loan from Winterfell's granaries. The harvest in our immediate fields has been unexpectedly strong." Lord Serwyn hesitated, pride wrestling with practicality. "That would be appreciated. I hate to ask, but I cannot let my people starve." Sansa rested a hand on his arm gently. "No one should starve. The North stands together. We'll work out the details. Once your fields recover, you can repay in kind." Serwyn's relief was visible in the loosening of his shoulders. Thank you, Lady Stark. Lady Brienne. They spoke further about logistics, scribbling notes on a small parchment. Even the smallest details, like which wagons and how many horses, could determine success or failure. With a plan set, Serwyn took his leave, bowing respectfully to both women. House Serwyn was loyal to my family for generations, Sansa murmured, watching him depart. We cannot let their line suffer. Brienne nodded. We won't. They both let out a breath. These day-to-day negotiations wore on anyone, but they were essential for weaving the tapestry of stability. For each issue resolved, another cropped up. Still, the two of them faced it together, balancing each other's strengths. They were just about to head inside when a messenger approached, winded from a hard ride. He bowed low, breath puffing in the cold. My ladies, I bring word from Moat Cailin. They spotted a large caravan traveling north from the Neck. It flies a familiar sigil, House Tarth. Brienne's eyes widened. A gentle wave of surprise rippled through her. She rarely received visitors from Tarth. Her father, Lord Selwyn, had grown older, and though they corresponded occasionally, he had never ventured this far north. Was it him arriving at last? Sansa glanced at Brienne with curiosity and excitement dancing in her expression. House Tarth? This is good news, I hope. Brienne inclined her head. I imagine so. Either it's my father himself or someone else from my home. I haven't seen Tarth's banner in quite some time. I'll have rooms prepared at once, Sansa said, already calling out to a passing steward. Though it may be days before they reach Winterfell, if they've only just been spotted at Moat Cailin. Brienne's heart drummed with cautious anticipation. Tarth had always felt distant since she'd devoted herself to the Starks. Yet a part of her was still that daughter of Evenfall Hall, shaped by the island's warm breezes and turquoise seas. The north was her home now, but what did her father's arrival mean? Her mind churned with possibilities as she and Sansa finalized instructions for the guests' reception. She knew she should not dwell on it too much. After all, her father might simply be coming to see the daughter he had not seen in years, or to pay respects to the new Lady of Winterfell. Yet Brienne's emotions warred inside her. She had once believed she'd return to Tarth after fulfilling her vows to the Stark daughters. But everything had changed. She had a calling here, a place. Would her father understand? She pushed the thoughts aside and returned to the day's duties. Evening fell, the candles in the castle lit. Suppers were taken in small groups, those who'd labored all day too tired for prolonged gatherings. Brienne joined Sansa and a few key figures at a modest meal in the Great Hall. Warm bread, salted fish, roasted onions, and ale. A typical northern spread hearty against the lingering chill of early spring. Afterward, Sansa excused herself to read the latest ravens from King's Landing in her solar. Brienne, needing a moment to clear her head, drifted to the godwood. The heart tree's branches formed stark shapes against the dusky sky. Red leaves fluttered, making a soft whisper like distant voices. Brienne found solace in that hush. She remembered Lady Catelyn's devotion to the Seven, yet also the North's faith in the old gods. She herself had never been strongly devout, but these days she prayed for guidance or at least for the wisdom to protect what she had sworn to protect. Her breath fogged as she stared at the weirwood's carved face. Will he understand? She murmured to the silent tree, thinking of her father. Can I stay in the north without disappointing him? The old gods, if they were listening, offered no clear sign. But the gentle rustle of leaves almost felt like an acknowledgement. She sighed and turned away, heading back to the keep. One day at a time, she told herself. The first step was to greet him and see what he wanted. In that manner, the days passed, each brimming with tasks, until at last the gates of Winterfell rumbled open for the traveling party from Tarth. A crisp, cold sun hung overhead, beams of light glinting off the scattered patches of snow. Brienne stood near the courtyard, flanked by Sansa, Podrick, and several guards. A hush fell over the onlookers as a cluster of riders trotted in, bearing tall spears from which fluttered the sapphire-blue banners of House Tarth, depicting the quartered sun and moons. Brienne's gaze locked onto the lead rider. She knew him by silhouette alone, Lord Selwyn Tarth, her father. His once dark hair had gone white, but he still held himself with the proud bearing of the Evenfall Lord. Beside him rode a small retinue, including a younger knight with sandy hair, likely a cousin from Tarth or a court-sworn shield. There were also a few servants, their cloaks dusty from the journey. As they reined in their horses, Lord Selwyn's eyes found his daughter, and the ghost of a tremulous smile crossed his face. Brienne's pulse hammered. She remembered how, the last time they met, she had been heading off to answer Renly Baratheon's call. She had left Tarth with dreams of knighthood, overshadowed by the mockery she had faced. Her father had never mocked her. He had tried to shield her from scorn, giving her tutors and training. But those days were long past. Now she was Lady of Winterfell, a reality that would have seemed impossible back then. She hoped her father would see she had made a rightful place for herself. She stepped forward, feeling the entire courtyard watch. Sansa followed at her side, a graceful presence. Lord Selwyn dismounted, wincing slightly as if his joints pained him. A servant hurried to help him. Then he straightened, eyes full of wonder as he looked upon the stone walls towering above them. "My lady," he said, voice deep yet touched with paternal tenderness. Then more softly, "My daughter, you stand tall indeed. I hardly recognized you from a distance." Brienne crossed the space and knelt in a quick gesture of respect. She was Lady of Winterfell, but she was also his child. "Father." He reached down, lifting her up before she could fully lower her head. "No need for that, Brienne. Gods, it's been too long." A tightness formed in her throat. It has. Welcome to Winterfell." She gestured behind her. "May I present Sansa Stark, the rightful lady of this castle. I serve as co-guardian in her stead." Sansa stepped forward, offering a small curtsy. "Lord Selwyn, we are honored by your visit. I've heard much of you from Brienne." Selwyn inclined his head respectfully. "Lady Stark, I thank you for receiving us. I've come a great distance to see my daughter in her new home." Brienne found that one word, home, stirred a confusion of emotion in her. She managed to keep her composure. "Let's get you inside, father. You must be tired from the journey. Rooms have been prepared." Thus began Lord Selwyn's arrival at Winterfell, an event that caused no small stir among the castle's populace. Servants rushed to carry trunks and settle the Tarth retinue. A small feast was hastily arranged for that evening, not so grand as the festival, but a gesture of hospitality to welcome Brienne's kin. The great hall was decked with newly cut flowers, a sign of the changing seasons. Long trestle tables were laden with hot bread, roasted game, and northern ale. The Tarth visitors, more accustomed to milder southern climes, seemed both intrigued and wary of the north's lingering chill. Brienne sat at the high table with Sansa and her father. Lord Selwyn cast discreet glances around, clearly assessing the changes the war and subsequent rebuilding had wrought. He admired the subtle touches that Sansa had introduced, rich northern tapestries depicting wolves in snowy forests, carefully chosen to replace old ones ruined in the wars. He also took a keen interest in the people, noticing they seemed content, well-fed despite the hardships. Between bites of roast venison, he asked gentle questions of Brienne, wanting to know more about her daily life here. She answered dutifully, how she rose early to inspect the guard, how she adjudicated disputes in the Great Hall, how she coordinated with Sansa on matters of trade and alliances. Occasionally, Sansa interjected with her own anecdotes, praising Brienne's skill in dealing with unruly lords or outlaws. More than once, Brienne felt a flush at hearing such praise. She never sought it, yet it warmed her to see her father's approving nods. He seemed pleased, perhaps even proud. After the feast, they retreated to a smaller solar for more private conversation. A fire crackled in the hearth, dispelling the evening chill. A single lamp cast a soft glow across the thick rug and carved chairs. Sansa excused herself after exchanging polite pleasantries, leaving Brienne and her father alone for the first time in years. The door clicked shut and silence settled like a blanket. Brienne stood near the window, arms folded in an uncertain stance. Lord Selwyn took a moment to stoke the fire with a poker, then turned to face his daughter. His gaze lingered on her broad shoulders, her calloused hands, the slight scarring near her hairline from old wounds. "You look well," he said quietly. "More at ease than I've ever seen you." She felt an unexpected lump in her throat. "I am content, I suppose." "Content? You never seemed so in Evenfall Hall." He sank into a chair with a weary sigh. "I often wondered if I did right by you, letting you roam so freely. I wanted you to be happy, but I worried for your safety. Then I heard the tales of battles, of White Walkers, of you becoming a knight." He paused and his voice tightened with emotion. "Brienne, you've exceeded anything I dared imagine." She lowered her gaze. You gave me the chance to learn swordsmanship, father. You never tried to force me into a marriage I didn't want. That was more than most girls could hope for. A faint smile creased his lips. Perhaps I saw the warrior in you even when you were a child. I only regret that I wasn't by your side through those darkest moments of war. Brienne's throat felt thick again. I never blamed you. I needed to walk my own path. And that path has led you here, to Winterfell, as a lady in your own right? He gestured around, clearly impressed by the solid grandeur of the solar, the sense of power that radiated through these old stones. I'm proud, Brienne. Proud that you found a place that respects your worth. She swallowed, glancing away to hide the prick of tears. It felt both comforting and painful hearing him express that pride she once craved so desperately. Thank you. Truly. He let silence stretch before continuing. I came, of course, to see you, but also with a proposition. Tarth has stabilized since the war, but we face our own challenges. Our navy was diminished in the conflicts, pirates and raiders have grown bolder in the straits. We need allies, trade partners. It occurred to me that forging a stronger link with the North could be beneficial for both sides. Brienne's brow knit. A trade alliance? Yes or more. House Tarth might lend naval support if the North ever requires it. In return, perhaps House Stark or Winterfell could facilitate land routes for us or offer resources we lack. I thought it best to discuss in person. But if such matters do not interest you, I'll respect that. She hesitated. It does interest me. Anything that strengthens the realm and helps our people is worth discussing. A quiet breath left her lips. I just never imagined I'd be in a position to negotiate such things on behalf of the North. Her father's eyes shone with gentle pride. It's strange for me too. But you hold considerable influence here, Brienne, even if you don't think of it that way. Lady Sansa herself speaks of you as her partner. Brienne's cheeks warmed slightly. I suppose so. She cleared her throat. If a formal alliance is your wish, let us speak with Sansa. Winterfell's resources are not mine alone to promise, but I'll support your proposal if I believe it's just. He nodded, relief crossing his face. Thank you. They settled into a more relaxed conversation then, Lord Selwyn asking about everyday details of Winterfell life, Brienne asking about Tarth and old acquaintances. She learned that the castle staff had tried to maintain the training yard she once used, that her father kept her old suits of armor displayed in a corridor. She felt a vague nostalgia, remembering the warm sea breezes of home, the turquoise waters. Yet it was all overshadowed by the knowledge that she belonged in the North now. Perhaps part of her heart would always be that awkward girl on Tarth, struggling to find acceptance, but the rest of her, her present self, had found something greater here. When at last Lord Selwyn retired for the night, they embraced. He pressed a kiss to her brow, murmuring, "Good night, my daughter," with a softness that resonated in the deepest parts of her. She watched him go, then lingered by the dying fire, letting her thoughts swirl. The possibility of linking Tarth and Winterfell in some formal bond was intriguing. Beyond trade, it could symbolize the bridging of the far south and the far north, an echo of what she herself represented. She resolved to discuss it with Sansa soon. She climbed the stairs to her chamber, exhaustion dragging at her bones. Yet her mind refused to settle even as she readied for bed. She slipped under the covers, blowing out the lamp, the flickering firelight casting dancing shadows. Sleep came in fits, her dreams a jumble of Tarth's sunlit coasts and Winterfell's snowy battlements. She half woke once, thinking she heard the sound of a tide washing up on ancient stone walls. Then she drifted back into restless darkness. By morning, Lord Selwyn was already up and about, inspecting Winterfell's walls with an appreciative eye. He spoke with some of the guards, graciously nodding at their stories of how they'd fought in the war. Brienne observed him from afar for a moment, relieved to see he was well received. The people of Winterfell, having grown to trust Brienne, showed courtesy to her father in turn. After a simple breakfast, Brienne and Sansa joined Lord Selwyn in a smaller council chamber. The table was spread with maps. On one side, a detailed layout of Tarth showing its mountainous spine and rocky coastline, on the other, a map of the North. Sansa wore a serious expression, reminiscent of a stateswoman preparing to negotiate. Brienne found her own posture aligning with that sense of formality, though she tried to project calm rather than tension. Lord Selwyn explained Tarth's needs in measured detail. The island's once proud fleet had been shattered by the war, pirates were harrying merchant ships, and certain vital trade routes were compromised. If Tarth could secure an overland route through the north to trade with the free cities or with other parts of Westeros, they could bypass some of the risks at sea. In exchange, Tarth would offer its naval knowledge and resources. While not what it once was, Tarth's shipwrights were among the best in the realm, and the island's strategic position near the narrow sea could provide valuable maritime support if the North ever needed it. Sansa listened intently, occasionally turning to Brienne with a thoughtful look as if silently asking for her input. Brienne, for her part, marveled at how this situation had come about. Tarth and Winterfell forming an alliance, with her father and her sworn lady effectively negotiating at the same table. Something that would have seemed unimaginable a few years earlier was now unfolding as a natural extension of the shared trust they had forged. When Selwyn finished, Sansa rested her elbows on the table. It's clear both sides could benefit. The North is vast, and much of our coastline is rugged. Reliable ships and shipwrights are always in demand, particularly if we want to expand trade to Essos or even to other kingdoms within Westeros. As for land routes, we've spent years repairing roads, ensuring travelers can move safely without fear of bandits. A new route from the eastern coastline up to White Harbor, then inland to Winterfell, might be feasible. Brienne placed a hand on the map, indicating the corridor of land that led from the south to the Neck, then northward along the King's Road. If Tarth's merchants can sail to the Stormlands or the Crownlands, disembark, and then transport goods by wagon all the way here, it could bypass the more dangerous sea routes. Meanwhile, the North gains access to resources Tarth can supply: cured fish, fine metalwork, even the tinted glass Tarth is known for. Lord Selwyn nodded with approval. Yes, that is the idea. Sansa drummed her fingers on the table, considering. We'd need to formalize the arrangement: mutual defense, trade privileges, perhaps some measure of stationed envoys in each other's lands to maintain communication. Selwyn gave a half-smile. Indeed, my lady. I'd like to propose a longer-term agreement, though. One that extends beyond my lifetime or even yours if the gods are kind. Perhaps an official alliance of our houses. Brienne blinked. You mean something akin to a marriage pact? He shook his head gently. Not necessarily. I know better than to presume. But if there were younger heirs to match, we might consider it in time. For now, a sworn alliance signed and sealed by the sigils of Tarth and Stark might suffice. A vow of friendship, if you will. Sansa exchanged a look with Brienne, a flicker of amusement dancing in her eyes. We can do that. House Tarth and House Stark allied is not something I'd have predicted, but times change. Lord Selwyn's gaze shifted to Brienne. Times do change, and my daughter is the bridge between us. Heat rose in Brienne's cheeks. She cleared her throat. Well, in practical terms, I see no immediate obstacle. We can draft the documents, have a few key lords witness, and finalize the agreement. Our arrangement would bring real benefits to the North, Sansa, as well as to Tarth. Sansa offered a decisive nod. Agreed. Let's proceed. And so, over the next few days, they hammered out the details. Raven scrolls flew back and forth between White Harbor and Winterfell, ensuring that the Manderly's major northern naval experts were informed. Drafts of the alliance treaty were penned, referencing each house's responsibilities. Tarth would help patrol certain sea lanes, build or repair ships for the North at reduced cost, and in return, Winterfell would guarantee safe passage of Tarth's merchants, provide certain supplies, and assist in repelling any threat to Tarth's shores should the Stormlands be unable or unwilling to help. There was talk of building a small consulate of Tarth in White Harbor, complete with Tarth's banner. A bold step, but one that symbolized their unity. As the negotiations progressed, Brienne noticed her father growing pensive whenever they were alone. She suspected he had come not only for official business but also for more personal reasons. Her suspicion proved correct one evening when he found her in the library, scanning a dusty tome of Northern history. The library was mostly deserted at that hour, the lamp casting a faint glow on shelves of old scrolls. He walked to her side, resting a hand on her shoulder. Brienne, I've watched you over these days. You belong here, that much is clear. But I worry that Tarth has lost you forever. She closed the book, turning to face him. I've thought about that. Perhaps I've changed too much to ever truly fit in at Evenfall Hall. But that doesn't mean I don't care about Tarth. Or about you. He studied her, sympathy and pride mingling in his gaze. I know you care, and I wish I could have seen your ascension here, how you earned the people's respect. But a selfish part of me wonders if you might visit Tarth again one day, if only for a while. The people there remember you, Brienne. They tell stories of the Maid of Tarth who fought for King Renly, who became the greatest knight of our island's history. She exhaled, a faint ache in her chest. I will try to visit, father. But not yet. The North is still healing. Sansa needs me. We're forging a future here, and I gave my oath to see it through. A soft acceptance touched his features. Then I will not press you further. I simply wanted you to know the door is always open. Tarth is your birthright, and if you ever wish to claim it, no one would question your worth. Brienne's throat constricted slightly. Thank you, she whispered, offering his hand a brief, grateful squeeze. She felt an unspoken understanding pass between them, that each had chosen their path, and though they diverged, they remained bound by blood and love. In the days that followed, final touches were put on the official alliance. Scribes copied the contract onto parchment, carefully wording every clause. Sansa, as the Lady of Winterfell, affixed her seal of the direwolf. Lord Selwyn placed Tarth's insignia, an emblazoned sun and moon crest that he pressed into hot wax with a signet ring. Finally, they asked Brienne to sign as a witness and as the link between the two houses. She placed her name with a steady hand. Brienne of Tarth, Lady of Winterfell. Once the treaty was sealed and witnessed by assembled lords and knights in a short ceremony in the Great Hall, a small cheer went up among those present. It was a moment of positivity for the North, another step out of the shadows of the war. The Tarth party was to remain for some time yet, to see if more details or trade matters needed settling. But the main objective was achieved. Over the celebratory meal that night, Sansa proposed a toast to new bonds and old friendships. Goblets of strong northern ale clinked, and even Brienne allowed herself a faint smile of satisfaction. Gradually, though, the sense of urgency surrounding the negotiations faded, allowing Lord Selwyn and his retinue to explore Winterfell. He spent many hours with Brienne, strolling the ramparts, learning about the North's defenses. She introduced him to Podrick, to the master-at-arms, to the castle steward in charge of rationing. He showed an active interest in all of it, always with that quiet paternal pride shining in his eyes. Brienne couldn't help but feel grateful that fate had allowed her father to see the fruit of her struggles, to witness her acceptance in the land she now called home. Then came the day of parting. The Tarth retinue prepared to depart, hoping to reach White Harbor before the roads became too muddy with the spring thaw. Lord Selwyn embraced Brienne one last time, the courtyard witnesses giving them a respectful distance. Behind them, horses stamped restlessly, hooves scattering loose gravel. "Thank you for everything," he said, voice gruff with emotion. "I will carry news of your success back to Tarth. And I hope in time you'll come to see the land of your birth again. In the meantime, know you have my love and my blessing." Brienne's arms tightened around him. "Safe travels, father." He kissed her cheek. Then he turned to Sansa, bowing graciously. "Lady Stark, you are as wise as you are kind. My gratitude for welcoming us and for trusting in this alliance." Sansa inclined her head. "Travel safely, Lord Selwyn. I expect we shall correspond often, and you are welcome here at any time." With a final wave, Lord Selwyn mounted his horse. The Tarth banner fluttered in the cold breeze. Brienne stood beside Sansa as they watched the retinue file out, the tall gates swinging open, the muffled beat of hooves slowly receding. For a long moment, she felt torn between worlds, Tarth and Winterfell. But when the gates closed again, she understood that her choice had been made. The North was her life now. Sansa placed a hand lightly on Brienne's arm. "Are you all right?" Brienne breathed in, letting the crisp air calm her thoughts. "Yes." It was good to see him. Sansa smiled gently. "I'm glad. Come, we still have a realm to manage." And so they carried on. Spring's thaw quickened, bringing muddy roads and the sweet tang of new grass. Buds began appearing on the weirwoods, and even the heart tree in the godwood seemed to glow with more vibrant red leaves. The small folk tilled the fields, readied seeds, and looked ahead to a growing season free of war. One day, word reached Winterfell that a caravan of Riverland's traders would pass through. Among them was rumored to be the bard who had visited months ago, along with other artisans. Sansa decided to host a small market fair inside the castle walls, giving local craftspeople and traveling merchants a safe space to do business. The idea appealed to Brienne. A fair would energize the people, fostering commerce and community. Preparations began swiftly. Within a week, the courtyard and adjoining open spaces bustled with tents and stalls. Bright fabrics draped over wooden counters displayed wares. Rugs from the free cities, carved trinkets from the Vale, beeswax candles from the Riverlands, and fine steel implements from the North. The air filled with the scents of spiced wine, roasted nuts, and fresh bread. There were ribbons strung between pillars, children weaving through crowds in excitement. Even a few singers and jugglers roamed, entertaining clusters of onlookers. Brienne and Sansa walked through the fair together on the opening day, accompanied by Podrick and a few guards for decorum. Yet no one seemed threatened by their presence. If anything, they were warmly greeted. Some stand owners rushed to bow, offering their best goods for inspection. Children tried to catch glimpses of the tall, knightly Lady Brienne, giggling when she smiled at them. Sansa's gracious laughter sparkled whenever a performer attempted to show off for her approval. In this swirl of color and noise, Brienne felt a lightness that contrasted with the grim days of war and scarcity. She found herself pausing at a tent where a craftsman displayed delicate glass figurines. One depicted a wolf, its stance poised, translucent legs capturing the ambient light. Another was a swan with iridescent wings. The shapes reminded her of Tarth's famed tinted glass, but these were new pieces, probably from a Riverlands artisan. Sansa caught her looking and stepped over. "They're lovely, aren't they?" "Yes," Brienne said softly. She picked up the wolf. It fit neatly in her palm, capturing a faint rainbow shimmer when tilted in the sunlight. Yes, I'd like to buy this. It's a fine symbol for Winterfell." The craftsman beamed at the interest. "Very fine eye, my lady. That one I call Ghost of the North for how it catches the light like a spirit on the snow. A special piece. Shall I wrap it for you?" She nodded, paying him. As he carefully wrapped the little glass wolf in soft cloth, Sansa smirked playfully. "A sentimental moment, Brienne? That's unusual." Brienne lifted a shoulder in a faint shrug, her lips curving in a subdued smile. "Perhaps I'm learning to appreciate finer things." "Good," Sansa said, "because you deserve to." They continued on, sampling honey cakes and mulled wine, watching children's games. A sense of normalcy enveloped them like a warm cloak. Yet in the midst of that happiness, an unexpected interruption arrived. A messenger hastened into the courtyard, dusty from the road, scanning the crowd urgently until he spotted Brienne and Sansa. He weaved past stalls and revelers, breathless and anxious. "My ladies," he managed, bowing. "I bring grave news from Castle Black. Wildling scouts spotted movement near the old Fist of the First Men, raiders or worse. They request immediate support or at least a warning to the nearest settlements." Brienne's ease of mind vanished. Sansa's face went still. The mention of the Fist of the First Men stirred memories of the undead threat that once loomed in that far northern wilderness. While the White Walkers were gone, parts of the northern frontier were still wild and lawless. There were free folk who'd settled with the Night's Watch's approval, but also splinter groups that did not abide by any truce, who might kill or pillage without remorse. "Did they say how many?" Brienne asked, her tone sharp. "Unclear," the messenger replied. "They saw fires in the distance, more than just a small camp. The Lord Commander requests watchers along the northern roads just in case these unknown forces move south." Sansa exchanged a grave look with Brienne. "We'll send word to the local lords, Serwyn, Glover, Umber, if we can reach them. We can organize patrols to guard the roads between Winterfell and the Wall." Brienne's mind was already racing, recalling maps of the Gift and the rough terrain near the Fist. "I'll dispatch a small force north to the last hearth, then coordinate with the Watch. Podrick can lead them if I must remain here. But perhaps I should go myself." Sansa set a hand on her arm. "You are free to do so if you wish, but you're needed here too. We have to weigh our responsibilities." She paused, glancing around at the bustling fair, the unsuspecting faces. Her jaw tensed. "Let's not cause a panic. The messenger will come with us to the Great Hall. We'll plan quietly." They slipped away from the festivities, alerting a few stewards to keep the peace while they handled an urgent matter. In the Great Hall, they convened a quick war council with Serdane, Podrick, and a handful of the senior guards. The messenger repeated the gist of his report, sightings of multiple campfires, glimpses of figures moving in groups. No sign of the dead rising again, thank the gods, but the territory was lawless. A large enough band of raiders could pose a serious threat to outlying homesteads. Brienne stood at the table, leaning over a map. "We can't ignore this. If these are hostile wildlings or some other group, they might slip past the Watch and come south." Podrick stepped forward. "I'll take a patrol of 30 good riders north, see what we can learn. We can position ourselves near Queensgate, link up with any local watchers." Serdane nodded. "I'll remain here to fortify Winterfell's guard. The roads must be kept safe for travelers." Sansa looked to Brienne. "Will you go with Podrick or stay?" Brienne exhaled, feeling the tug of duty in two directions. Her instincts as a knight urged her to ride north, to protect the realm at the frontier. But her position as Lady of Winterfell meant she also had to guard the seat of power, especially with so many visitors here for the fair. She looked at Podrick, remembering his proven capability. He was no longer the timid squire who followed her around wide-eyed. He was a knight who had fought and bled in the war. "I'll remain at Winterfell," she said at last, though the words felt heavy. "Podrick, you'll be my eyes and ears. If there's danger, send a raven immediately. If needed, I can ride out with reinforcements." Podrick inclined his head, determination lighting his features. "I won't fail you, my lady." That settled, they dispersed to assemble supplies. Podrick's patrol would depart at dawn, traveling light for speed. Brienne felt a pinch of worry as she watched him buckle on his sword belt, adjusting the strap with steady hands. She trusted him, yet she knew how unpredictable the far north could be. Standing in the courtyard at daybreak, she clasped his forearm. "Be cautious. Don't charge into unknown territory blindly," she told him, voice low. "Scout, gather information, and keep the men together." He nodded. "Of course." She couldn't resist pulling him into a quick embrace. "Return safe," she murmured, her voice tight. He stepped back, saluted smartly. "I will." Then he mounted his horse, leading the column out through the gates. Their breath plumed in the cold morning air, hoofs crunching on the gravel. Brienne stood, arms folded, until they vanished from sight. Only then did she turn and walk back into Winterfell, the day feeling strangely hollow without Podrick's cheerful presence. Word of possible unrest up north soon circulated among the castle staff. Sansa addressed it carefully, assuring those at the fair that there was no immediate threat, encouraging them to carry on. The tension that seeped into the atmosphere was noticeable but not overwhelming. People continued browsing stalls, making deals, enjoying the fleeting sunshine. Brienne and Sansa maintained a visible presence, reminding everyone that Winterfell's leadership was vigilant. However, an undercurrent of worry took root in Brienne's heart, a quiet dread that something ominous stirred beyond the wall. While the fair lasted a few more days, Brienne could only half enjoy it. She went through the motions of greeting merchants, checking on logistics, and ensuring the visitors were safe, but her thoughts kept drifting northward. She spent time in the library, searching for records about old raids, trying to glean any pattern in how free folk or outlaws might strike. She sent letters to nearby lords, urging them to double their watch and remain ready to send men if needed. The fair ended with minimal fuss. Most traders departed with cheerful pockets, satisfied by the sales they made in the north. Winterfell quieted again, the courtyard empty of tents. Life resumed its steady rhythm. Sansa turned her attention to the new farmland expansions while Brienne kept watch for any raven from Podrick. Days slipped into a week without word. She tried to reassure herself no news might be good news. But by the 10th day, she found herself pacing the ramparts at dusk, scanning the dark horizon for any sign of riders. Finally, on the 12th day, a raven arrived in the early morning. The black-feathered bird swooped into the rookery, the maester hurriedly untying the message. Brienne was summoned at once. In the maester's chamber, with Sansa at her side, she took the tiny parchment and unrolled it. Her eyes skimmed Podrick's handwriting. "We have scouted near Queensgate. Sighted a large encampment, at least 100 strong, possibly more. Some are free folk, others appear to be deserters from various armies, maybe even ex-Sellswords. They are not openly aggressive yet, but we fear they plan to move south. Local homesteads are frightened. We need reinforcements or guidance on how to proceed. We'll remain here for now, sending 2 men back to escort any aid." "Podrick." Brienne's jaw clenched. 100 or more. That was no small band, it was a force that could cause real havoc if it decided to raid the Gift or the nearby settlements. She looked at Sansa gravely. "We need to act." "Yes," Sansa said, biting her lip. "If they move south, they could terrorize the entire region." Brienne handed the parchment to Maester Colin. "Send a raven to House Glover and House Serwyn. Request immediate muster of their men. We'll send a force from Winterfell to meet them near Queensgate. I'll ride out with them." Sansa's eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure you want to go personally?" "Yes," Brienne said firmly. "This may be bigger than a simple patrol can handle. Podrick needs leadership on the ground, and I won't entrust the safety of the North to chance. Besides," she added quietly, "it's my place to protect them." Sansa stepped forward, placing a hand on Brienne's shoulder. "Very well. I'll remain here to manage the rest of the realm. But be careful. Don't let it come to bloodshed if there's another way." "I'll try," Brienne promised, though she knew that armed groups rarely yielded to pleas. She turned to the maester again. "Have the steward prepare enough provisions for a force of 200 men if we can gather that many quickly. Send word also to the Lord Commander at Castle Black, letting him know we'll approach from the south." Colin nodded, hurrying away. Sansa's hand lingered on Brienne's arm. The 2 women shared a glance of mutual concern, unspoken truths passing between them. The North was never free of potential threats, and it was their duty to stand guard. Brienne mentally steeled herself for what lay ahead. She was no stranger to battle, but she had hoped such conflicts were behind them. Duty, however, rarely paid heed to hope. By midday, the courtyard filled with activity. Men in Winterfell's livery gathered, archers, spearmen, and a handful of mounted knights. Their breath smoked in the cold air as they packed gear onto wagons. Snow had largely melted, leaving damp ground and churned mud. Brienne supervised quietly, issuing orders for the proper distribution of rations, the arrangement of tents, the readiness of horses. She wore half-plate armor over thick leathers, a stark sigil pinned to her cloak. Her own sword hung at her hip, a testament to her unwavering oath. Sansa approached as Brienne checked her stallion, Summerwind, adjusting the saddle. The chestnut mare snorted, pawing at the mud. Sansa's fur-lined cloak fluttered in the crisp breeze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sansa reached out, resting her hand on Brienne's forearm. "I wish you didn't have to leave," she said softly. "But I understand." Brienne swallowed. "I promise I'll see this through and return safe. Keep watch here. I'll send ravens if anything changes." Sansa exhaled, nodding. "May the gods be with you, Brienne." With that, the force set out from Winterfell's gates, a drumbeat of hooves and boots echoing across the courtyard. Brienne rode at the head, standard-bearers flanking her with the direwolf banner. Spirits were sober. Many remembered the horrors of the long night, though this conflict was presumably mortal, not undead. Still, the unknown loomed. Their journey north was laborious. The road was thick with mud in places, and they had to move at a careful pace so as not to wear out the horses or break wagon wheels. By the time they reached the meeting point with House Glover's men, a cold drizzle had set in. Lord Glover himself arrived with about 50 soldiers, hardy men used to the damp gloom of the far north. They greeted Brienne respectfully, no longer harboring doubts about her place in Winterfell's leadership. House Serwyn sent a smaller contingent of 20, led by a minor cousin of the house. Thus united, the combined force pressed on. The terrain grew wilder, the trees of the Wolfswood thickening until they finally neared Queensgate, an old settlement that served as one of the last stable stopovers before the wall. Podrick and a few of his knights emerged from a watchtower to greet them. Relief shone on Podrick's face when he saw Brienne. "My lady," he said, bowing. Then he straightened, stepping forward to clasp her forearm. "I'm glad you came." She glanced around. The settlement was small, just a scattering of huts and a larger structure for travelers. The people here had the pinched look of those who fear an imminent raid. "Has anything changed?" Brienne asked. Podrick nodded grimly. "Their encampment seems to be growing. We've counted nearly 150, from what we can tell. They're a ragged mix. Wildlings, deserters from southern armies, maybe a few criminals on the run. They haven't attacked yet, but they're hunting in the area and intimidating locals. We tried approaching, but they threatened us to keep away." Brienne frowned. Could it be they're simply trying to find a place to survive? Or are they truly planning to march south and pillage? It's not entirely clear. Some wildlings said they just want to live free, but they're under the sway of a self-proclaimed chieftain who seems bent on carving out territory. He calls himself Herrick Stormslayer. Rumor says he was a soldier under one of the warlords in Essos, then drifted to the far north. He might not be content with peaceful settlement. Brienne set her jaw. "We'll try diplomacy first. If they refuse, we'll have to drive them back or subdue them." Podrick nodded. "Agreed. We should move soon, though, before they realize our numbers have grown." The next morning, after a night's rest in rudimentary tents, Brienne led a portion of her force toward the encampment's edge. She chose to keep half of them back as a reserve, not wanting to appear too threatening. Podrick rode at her side, with Lord Glover's representative close behind. The sky was a leaden gray, a chill wind cutting across the open fields. In the distance, a thin spiral of smoke revealed the location of the bandit camp. Brienne halted her group at 100 paces away. She rode forward with a white pennon of truce, stopping at a distance that felt safe but within hailing range. Voices stirred in the camp. Figures emerged. Rough-looking men and women, clad in mismatched armor and fur pelts. Brienne raised her voice. "I am Brienne of Tarth, Lady of Winterfell. I've come to parley with Herrick Stormslayer. We mean no harm if you do not challenge the peace of these lands. Show yourselves and speak." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a tall man came forward, stepping through the bracken with a confident swagger. He wore a patchwork of boiled leather and chain, a thick cloak of bear fur draped over broad shoulders. A scar ran across his cheek, and his eyes gleamed with cunning. Beside him walked a woman with braided hair, a short spear in her grip. Behind them milled a few dozen more, each armed and tense. Herrick studied Brienne on her horse, a sneer forming at the corner of his mouth. "Lady of Winterfell? They send a woman to deal with us?" Brienne felt heat flare in her cheeks, but she kept her composure. "They send a knight," she corrected. "Do you seek to live here in peace, or do you plan to raid and kill? We prefer not to shed blood, but we will defend the north if you force our hand." Herrick tilted his head back in a mocking laugh. "A knight, is it? We've heard stories of a tall woman knight. Rumor says you're good with a sword." He squinted at the soldiers behind her. "We're free folk and free fighters, done with kneeling. We live where we want." Brienne clenched her jaw. "No one stops you from living in peace. There are lands beyond the wall where free folk have settled with the Night's Watch's blessing. Or you could petition the northern lords for farmland if you abide by their rules. But terrorizing local homesteads is not an option." A ragged cheer rose from the band behind Herrick as if mocking her. The man smirked. "We bow to no southern lord. You want us gone? You can try to force us. But I've got more men than you think, and we're hungry for the spoils of these soft lands." Brienne's heart sank. She recognized the combative glint in his eyes. Men like Herrick thrived on violence. Yet she tried once more. "If you attack, you'll be met with steel. Houses Glover, Serwyn, and Winterfell stand united. The Night's Watch will also intervene if you threaten the gift. You cannot hope to stand against us all." His sneer deepened. "We'll see. I have men who've killed White Walkers, men who've fought in Esso's pit fights, and we have nothing left to lose. Tell me, Lady Knight, are you prepared to kill every last one of us?" Brienne felt a jolt of frustration. "No, but I will if you leave me no choice." Herrick glanced around, seemingly assessing the situation. Then he gave a barking laugh. "We'll strike camp when we're good and ready. Come challenge us if you dare. Otherwise, get back to your castle walls. The winter's over and the free times begin." Before Brienne could respond, he turned and strode away, his followers closing ranks behind him. She watched, fists tightening on her reins. Diplomacy had been rebuffed. She wheeled her horse around, returning to her waiting force. As they rode back, Podrick scowled. "He's not interested in reason. They'll raid soon if we don't act." Lord Glover's representative grimly nodded. "A pity, but we can't let them terrorize the region." Brienne's mind spun. Perhaps if they could isolate Herrick's leadership, the rest of the group might disperse. Or if they blockaded supplies, the camp might dissolve. Yet she was acutely aware that each passing day risked an attack on the local homesteads or a surprise move deeper south. "Set up a perimeter around their camp," she instructed. "We'll try to cut off their hunting and foraging. If we can starve them out, perhaps they'll yield. But if they strike first, we must be ready to defend ourselves. No one is to engage without my command." Over the next few days, the tension wound tighter. Brienne's men patrolled the surrounding area, ensuring travelers were safe and local farms evacuated to a secure distance. At night, fires burned in the distant camp, a silent warning that the raiders still bided their time. Occasionally, small skirmishes broke out. A handful of Herrick's scouts clashed with Glover's patrol. Each time, a few men died on both sides. Brienne's attempts to open dialogue again were met with arrows or crude insults from the raiders. She began to fear a larger conflict was inevitable. On the fourth day after parley, just before dawn, a horn blast shattered the quiet. Brienne sprang from her tent, sword in hand, to find a chaotic scene. A contingent of Herrick's men had attacked under cover of darkness, trying to raid the supply wagons. Guards rushed to fend them off. She glimpsed figures darting between tents, steel flashing in the dim pre-dawn light. Shouts and clashing iron filled the air. Brienne roared for order, rallying her soldiers. She plunged into the fray, her sword cutting down a raider who lunged at her with a crude axe. Around her, men stumbled and cursed in the dark. Podrick appeared, blocking an arrow that streaked toward her. She turned, recognized the threat, and advanced on the archer, disarming him with a swift strike. The archer crumpled, screaming. Torches flared as more of Brienne's men woke and grabbed their weapons. Within minutes, the raiders realized they couldn't overcome the prepared defenders. They pulled back, slinking into the surrounding woods. Panting, Brienne surveyed the aftermath, a few wounded on her side, though none fatally, and some injured raiders left behind. She pressed her lips together, dread coiling in her stomach. The first blow had fallen. Come daylight, scouts reported that Herrick's main camp had packed up and begun moving southeast, presumably seeking easier targets or a way to slip around Brienne's perimeter. With tension spiking, Brienne made the call to mobilize her entire force. If the raiders scattered, they could sow devastation in multiple areas. She had to drive them back or capture them. Gathering her knights and the local levies, she prepared for battle. The pursuit stretched across uneven ground with occasional clashes when pockets of raiders turned to fight. Arrows whistled through the air, swords flashed in the mist. By midday, Herrick himself was spotted at the head of a band of about 70, forging through a rocky ravine. Brienne led the charge, aiming to cut them off. Podrick and Glover's men flanked the ravine's exits, forming a pincer. The clash escalated into a brutal skirmish. Shouts echoed, horses screamed, dust billowed. Brienne fought at the front, her sword singing with each swing. She knocked aside a spear thrust, hammered her pommel into a raider's face, spun to block another. A savage thrill and a grim resolve mingled in her veins. She would not let these outlaws ravage the north. She pressed forward, her men following. Herrick, looming in his bear fur cloak, roared a challenge. He and Brienne clashed in a swirl of steel. His blade struck her shoulder plate, sparking off metal. She drove him back with powerful cuts. Their swords locked, and for a moment they stood eye to eye, his teeth bared, her expression set in fierce determination. He twisted free, lunging again. She parried, feeling the impact rattle her arm. The man was strong, but she was stronger. With a final pivot, she knocked his sword arm aside and slammed her hilt into his gut. He doubled over. She kicked his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Around them, the fighting waned as the raiders saw their chieftain fall. Some threw down weapons, others fled, only to be met by Glover's men. Podrick's sword glinted with fresh blood as he subdued another fierce raider, disarming him with a deft move. The ravine filled with moans of the wounded, the rattle of dying breaths. Herrick spat blood, glaring up at Brienne. She pinned him with her blade at his throat. Yield, she demanded, chest heaving. He snarled, trying to rise. She pressed the blade closer. Yield, or I'll end you now. A glint of defiance still burned in his gaze, but survival instinct won out. Slowly he relaxed his hands. I yield, he hissed. But we won't kneel. Never. Brienne's lip curled. You don't have to kneel. But you'll face justice for the lives you've taken. She motioned for her soldiers. Bind him. Gather all who surrendered. We'll tend the wounded, but they stand as prisoners of Winterfell now. So it was done. The battlefield stilled, the survivors rounded up. Many had died, though fewer on Brienne's side than she feared. She oversaw the rudimentary triage of the injured, ensuring even the raiders who had fought were given basic aid. Then she supervised the disposal of the dead, grim work, but necessary. All the while, she felt a hollow ache. Battle was never clean. Bodies of men and women lay limp, eyes staring at nothing. She hated that it had come to this, yet it was the cost of protecting the realm. With Herrick captive, the remaining outlaws were leaderless. Some scattered into the wilds, but most were caught or surrendered. By evening, the threat had been broken. Brienne conferred with Podrick and the others, deciding they would march the prisoners back to Winterfell for judgment, letting Sansa or a council decide their fates. The free folk among them who claimed they only wanted land might be allowed to settle peacefully if they swore not to raid again. Herrick and the worst criminals, though, would face the full weight of northern justice. By the time Brienne returned to her tent, exhaustion crushed her. Mud caked her boots, her armor stained with blood. She washed as best she could in a basin, wincing at bruises. Podrick entered to report that the perimeter was secure, the men preparing camp for the night. Thank you, she said, voice hoarse. You fought well. He nodded, then hesitated. And you, my lady. That was... I'm glad you bested him. But are you truly all right? She exhaled. I will be. War is never easy. But we did what we had to. Her gaze shifted to the tent flap where the distant flicker of torches lit the night. Tomorrow we head home. Home. For all the blood and horror, that word steadied her heart. She had done her duty, though it weighed heavy. Now, with the threat contained, she would return to Winterfell, to Sansa, to the seat she guarded with fierce devotion. She realized with a pang that this was the role she had chosen and embraced, the shield of the North, the sword of justice, the Lady of Winterfell who did not shrink from battles or harsh decisions. Morning came gray and damp as they loaded the prisoners onto wagons under guard. Herrick sat chained, his eyes smoldering with hatred. Brienne paid him little heed. She led the caravan south, the battered and tired soldiers following, heads held high in weary relief. They had done their duty. The North was safe from this threat. It took days to travel back, days filled with a somber mood. They passed the ravaged sites of minor skirmishes, the site of broken weapons and half-burned tents. Brienne forced herself to look to acknowledge the cost. At last, the familiar walls of Winterfell rose on the horizon. Her heart lifted at the sight of its gray ramparts and proud banners snapping in the wind. Even the muddy roads leading up to the gate felt like a comfort. Word of their approach preceded them. Sansa stood in the courtyard as they entered, wrapped in a dark cloak. Guards moved aside to let the column pass. The prisoners were directed to a holding area. Brienne dismounted, her muscles aching. Sansa came forward, relief shining in her eyes, and embraced Brienne without hesitation. "You're back," Sansa said, voice tight with emotion. "I was worried." Brienne's breath caught. "I'm sorry to have caused worry. But we prevailed. Herrick Stormslayer is captured, his force scattered or taken." Sansa nodded, stepping back, taking in the lines of exhaustion on Brienne's face. "I can see you've been through a lot. We'll talk of it, but first, you need rest." Her gaze flickered to Podrick, who bowed, equally spent. "All of you do." Brienne agreed, though she insisted on seeing the prisoners locked away safely first. She also quickly recounted the key details of the conflict to Sansa, letting her know the approximate casualties, the conditions that led them to fight. Sansa listened gravely, then touched Brienne's arm. "We'll hold a hearing. For now, the people of the north can rest easier." At last, Brienne peeled off her armor, letting a steward help her. She sank into a hot bath that the servants had prepared, eyes closing in near overwhelming relief. Every muscle throbbed, bruises blossomed along her limbs. But as the warm water soothed her, she felt a slow gratitude. They had done what was necessary. The north endured. Once clean, she dressed in a simple tunic, ignoring the formal dresses she sometimes wore for official gatherings. She intended to go straight to bed, but found that Sansa was waiting for her in a small sitting room near the library. A fire crackled in the hearth. 2 chairs were pulled close, a pot of hot tea on a small table. Sansa motioned her in. "I thought you might want some quiet, but I also wanted to see you were all right." Brienne smiled faintly. "Thank you." She settled in the chair, letting the warmth of the fire and the tea relax her. "We lost fewer men than we might have, but there were losses all the same." "I'm sorry," Sansa murmured. "We'll see that their families are taken care of." Brienne nodded, sipping the tea. It had a hint of mint, soothing her sore throat. "Herrick will need judgment. He's a murderer and a raider, but we also have to consider the free folk who merely followed him out of desperation. Some of them might want an honest living." Sansa pursed her lips. "We'll sift the guilty from the simply misguided. We can't become tyrants, but we must enforce order." "Yes," Brienne agreed softly. She stared into the fire. Memories of the battle flickered behind her eyes, the clash of swords, the smell of blood, the final look of defiance on Herrick's face. "I always hoped the wars were done, that we'd never again face such violence." Sansa leaned closer, her gaze empathetic. "We can't rid the world of violence entirely, but we can mitigate it, stand against it whenever it rears its head. And as long as we stand together, the North will not break." Brienne met her gaze. In that moment, she felt the full measure of their bond. They were no longer just lady and sworn shield, nor even simply co-rulers. They were 2 women who had weathered storms unimaginable and emerged stronger together. A quiet hush fell, broken only by the crackle of embers. Brienne set her teacup aside. She swallowed, a tightness in her chest that was a mix of relief and lingering sorrow. "Thank you," she said at last, voice barely above a whisper. "For trusting me to face this. For everything." Sansa reached out, gently covering Brienne's hand with her own. "You've done so much for me, for Winterfell. You are not just a sword arm, Brienne. You're part of what makes Winterfell strong, what gives it heart." Brienne looked down at their joined hands, the contrast of Sansa's pale, slender fingers against her own larger, rougher ones. Emotions swirled, too numerous to name. She simply squeezed Sansa's hand in return, letting the gesture speak for all the gratitude and devotion she felt. Eventually, Sansa gave a small smile, withdrawing her hand. "We'll arrange the trial in a few days, once the men have rested. Then, perhaps, we can truly move forward from this." Brienne inhaled, steadying herself. "Yes, my lady." Thus concluded the matter of Herrick Stormslayer's band. Over the following days, prisoners were questioned, evidence weighed. Some wildlings who could prove they hadn't harmed innocents were allowed to go north, escorted by the Night's Watch, or else remain in the gift if they agreed to work for local lords. Herrick, along with a handful of his most violent followers, was condemned for murder and raiding, sentenced to a swift execution. The sentence was carried out on a cold morning, Brienne presiding alongside Sansa. There was no triumph in it, only the solemn necessity of justice. Afterward, a hush settled over Winterfell, a collective breath of relief that the threat had passed. Life resumed a semblance of peace. Fields were planted, the warmth of spring slowly chasing away the last vestiges of winter chill. Brienne found herself once again settling into the routine of governance, hearing disputes, training soldiers, overseeing new projects. Sometimes she walked alone in the courtyard at dusk, letting the quiet murmur of the castle wash over her. She reflected on the cyclical nature of duty. A threat arises, they confront it, and once more try to rebuild. One late afternoon, she came upon the glass wolf she had purchased at the fair. It stood on a small shelf in her solar, catching the slanting sunlight. She picked it up, turning it in her hands. The translucent form glimmered, reminding her of ghosts, of ephemeral illusions that vanish when confronted with reality. She thought of the illusions she once held about knighthood, about being accepted, about happily ever after stories. Now she understood that true acceptance and happiness came not through illusions but through forging bonds of trust and responsibility. In that glimmer of glass, she saw the shape of her own journey, a knight out of place in many corners of the realm until she found a cause that needed her, a people who came to rely on her, and a friend in Sansa Stark who understood her worth. The real gift was not the object's fragile beauty but the realization that, against all odds, she had become part of something enduring, Winterfell itself. So the days and months moved on, with Brienne continuing as Lady of Winterfell in both name and deed. She presided over times of planting and harvest, times of sorrow and celebration. Letters arrived from Tarth, from King's Landing, and even from Arya Stark in lands unknown, each thread weaving into the North's larger tapestry. The realm remained watchful but hopeful, shaped by a quiet conviction that the worst of their nightmares lay behind them. And through it all, Brienne of Tarth stood as sentinel and nurturer, a protective presence cast in flesh and steel. The North called her Lady, but many simply called her Brienne, a name spoken with warmth and admiration that once seemed impossible. Hers was a legacy of devotion and determination, carved into the stones of Winterfell as surely as the name Stark. On a crisp morning following a late summer night, she walked along the outer walls with Sansa, just as they often did, discussing the usual swirl of tasks. The wind carried a faint hint of autumn. Far below, the gates opened for a line of merchants bringing wool from the western holds. The dogs barked from the kennels, excited by the commotion. Sansa paused at a crenellation, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Brienne," she said softly, "do you remember the first vow you made to me? To protect me?" Brienne nodded, stepping closer. "I do. I think you've surpassed that vow. You've protected Winterfell itself, given it new life." Sansa's eyes shone. "And you've given me a friend I didn't expect to find in a world so cruel." Brienne felt her chest tighten with emotion. "You were never just my liege," she managed, voice hushed. "You're my friend too, Sansa." A smile curved Sansa's lips, bright as the pale sun overhead. "Come, we have more to do today. The realm doesn't govern itself." Brienne returned the smile. Indeed. They continued along the wall, the hush of the rising day enveloping them. Two women forged by hardship and bound by choice. Step by step, they walked into the future they had shaped. A future where honor was not just a word on the lips of lords but a living promise in the heart of Winterfell's lady, Brienne of Tarth, who had once been mocked for her dreams but now stood triumphant in the place she was always meant to be. And that truth, quietly woven through the North's cold wind and sturdy stones, was more precious than any crown or song. Thus the seasons turned, and still they stood. If the old gods gazed down from the red-leafed weirwood, perhaps they smiled upon the new tapestry of the North, woven from courage, sacrifice, and a knight's resolute heart.